Hello everyone, I am the Enforcer, and today I'm bringing to you the day 26 news of the Ukraine war. We've had a whole litany of interesting and mostly, well, really just interesting developments and news that have occurred around the entire country today. And so, without going into an intro for too long, I would like to give thanks to everyone last night who donated to Doctors Without Borders. We managed to raise $30,500 for Doctors Without Borders. This is the largest amount that we've raised in a fundraiser on this channel, and I have to tell everyone again that I'm so thankful that we're all able to make a difference in the Ukraine conflict and to help and ease the suffering of the Ukrainians in any way possible. I just have to say again, thank you all so much. It means a lot to me, and it means a lot to the people who will get that help in the future. So, moving on from that, to cover the schedule for tonight, we'll be running the usual schedule. We will cover the northern theater of Kyiv and Chernihiv. We will then take questions in between the northern and eastern fronts. We will then move over to the eastern fronts and answer, just cover the news there. We will then move on down to the southern front, and in between the eastern and southern fronts, we will once again answer questions. Then I'll cover the southern front, and then move on to the only bit of international news we've gotten today, and then we'll be taking questions and answers for the rest of the stream. Also, one more thing is that I have removed on this version of the map all the green and yellow areas. So this kind of like makes the map much less complicated in its appearance and kind of lays out the more important information in a better way. We still do have the old map here that shows like all of the squigglies and drawings that I did on the map to show where the Russians will probably advance. But tonight I'm going to be using this one mostly throughout the stream, so that way there isn't a lot of confusion, because I do understand that the map keeps on getting more and more complicated as time goes on, because I'm trying to add a little bit more and more of my assumptions, and, assumptions that we can make from the information we've been collecting over days, but tonight we'll be cutting most of that out, and if we want to reference that map, we still have it right here. Another thing is that before we actually go into the news, I'd like to discuss to my new viewers, so if anyone's asking in the live chat what the symbols on the map mean, I'm going to explain them here and then just like direct them back to this part of the live stream so that way they can take a look at it and hear the explanation. Also, if you'd like to download the map, there's a link in the description below, and there's a short kind of like legend up here in the top corner that's just entirely written out. Unfortunately, I can't create an actual legend for the map because Google My Maps doesn't allow that sort of thing. But here's the most important things to know. The black line down here represents the republics of Donetsk and Luhansk, which were breakaway regions that Ukraine didn't have actual control over, but they claimed the territory that these two republics are in, rightfully so, because this is actually a part of Ukraine. But nonetheless, the original borders are highlighted in black. All the red lines across this map are the Russian front line. So this is where we know for sure that Russian units are and are present at. So everything in red is where the Russians are. So like this area up here in Chernihiv that's kind of shaped like Vermont, that whole entire area is controlled by the Russians, as well as this one, and the list goes on and on around the entirety of the country. There is one exception here, and that's this maroon line, which is our color that we use for breakthrough convoys or breakthrough units. We don't really have enough information to confirm whether Russian units are actively present and moving through this area. We just know that a while ago we got some videos of Russian units moving through, and so this area was highlighted purple, well, really maroonish purple, so that way we can say that there were Russian units here, but we don't really know if they have a large presence there, if you see what I'm saying. Also, to address the markers have different symbols on them, but this is just kind of for me to get the gist of what is going to be next. Fires are usually destruction. Skull of crossbones is usually like tanks and equipment destroyed. And then little bugle calls are very important news. So it could be like areas of land gained, presidential addresses, or something like that. They're also color-coded based off of the day. And so up here in the corner, you can actually get a layout of the days. So green is day 22, so these are like day 22. Olive is day 23, which are these here. Yellow is day 24, so these are these here. And then red is day 25, which are these here. And blue is day 26, but I didn't actually put that in on the map legend, which will be corrected after the stream. But nonetheless, that's kind of like the breakdown on the days. So I can load up a week's worth of content on this one map. And I'm sorry for all my return viewers who are watching this. I'm sorry, but I'm just trying to make sure that new viewers know what the map's about. But the blue highlighted markers are the ones we're covering today, and the rest of the markers are to show you all the events that have happened over the week. And so you can sometimes see frontline developments based off of where they are, although they're not exact. They're not geolocated. They're in the approximate location of where it happened, according to the information we could collect. So, without further ado, and without stretching on the information about the map too long, let's get to the news. The first thing we've seen today, which is huge news to me, is that the Ukrainian troops have taken more ground. The Ukrainian troops have pushed the Russians back in this area along the E40, and they've retaken the villages of Makariv, Makushka, and I believe that they're currently fighting in Berezivka. So we do know that they've made massive ground because the Russians actually controlled most of this land up to Makariv, and so they've pushed them back and started to close this bulge by a few miles, it appears. So that's incredibly good news. We know that the Ukrainian counterattack is still apparently conducting itself at a pretty decent pace and actually making some kind of headway or progress. Another thing I'd like to point out is that apparently I may have gotten this information wrong, but I'm just wanting to make sure because this doesn't really add up to make the picture seem correct, but maybe it's that the picture isn't being painted right. But the dam here was actually ruptured on day 24, and it flooded this entire Irpin River area, which you can see here has a whole bunch of canals dug around the river. The thing is that I said the Russians probably blew it up to stop the Ukrainian counterattack because at that moment in time, when that bridge blew up, the Ukrainian counterattack was doing very well and actually pushing the Russians back pretty far from the city of Kyiv. And so it appeared to make sense that this dam's rupture would have been caused by the Russians to try and slow the Ukrainian counterattack since this is in the path of it. But I've heard a lot in the chat that this was actually done by the Ukrainians to stop the Russians from advancing, and that's kind of weird to me. Well, maybe it's not too weird. Maybe they decided that this counterattack could only get so far, and so they decided to blow up the dam so that way they could set up defensive positions on the other side of the floodplain and then wait for the dam, I guess, flood waters to subside, and then by the time the Russians come back across, they have a well-established defensive line here. That may be the case, but I was thinking that just based off of not knowing who really blew up the dam, the Russians probably blew it up so that way they could dig defenses on their side of the floodplain and then wait until the water subside, and then they would be able to stop the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Either way, it really ends up with the same result. One side's digging in, in preparation for the other to then be able to cross the floodplains again. But I would like to get a little bit of clarification on that tonight. So if anyone has any idea of what's happening there in the actual main story behind that dam's rupture, let us know, and we'll probably get around to that by the time of the first questions. Now moving on into the city of Kyiv, we can see that an anti-ship missile was apparently repurposed to be used in Kyiv. From the information we've gotten here, this is an alpha anti-ship missile, the second stage of it, and it appears to have separated, of course, over some area of land because it's the second stage, and landed. And so it's giving us proof that maybe the Russians are starting to run out of conventional cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, and so now they're starting to revert to more creative tactics, which is using anti-ship missiles, which can be used to attack land targets, but to not really the same effect, I guess you could say. But that's really interesting nonetheless. That's really all the information we have on it. It could be going either way. Maybe it was just more readily available for them to get an anti-ship missile, but they still had a readily available and decent supply of normal cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, but we don't really know that information for sure. So we're now going to move on into the actual city center of Kyiv, where we can see that it was time for a Ukrainian man to move. It appears that the wall on his building, which I've actually shown the pictures of this before, it appears to have just fallen, but it left everything inside of the apartments completely intact. You can still see the furniture and dressers and stuff lined up perfectly. It didn't even touch like the cups on the dressers and stuff. The wall just literally just fell down and didn't touch anything, including these stacks of books. And so now he's in there, apparently packing to move. And I'd have to say at this point, it seems like a pretty smart option. So I'm just going to show you all the video. It's just very interesting. It's like a cutaway view of an apartment, and you could just see people living their daily lives in there. And it's really unfortunate to think that this man's now been displaced from his house because, he looks like an old man. He's probably been living there for quite a while, considering how old the building looks. So anyways, that was the end of the video. Now it's just going on a loop. We're now going to move on to the next bit of news that we've gotten today, and we can see that a mall was destroyed in Kyiv. Apparently 8 people were killed in the attack, and once again it's more civilian lives lost.
The attack which happened last night here in Kiev, just 15 minutes away from the center. That's crazy. This is totally insane.
It's a pretty big mall, and it appears that the blast from whatever kind of ordnance exploded near it burned the entire mall down from what we can see in the video. And so I'm going to show you all the Russian perspective of the airstrike on the mall, so that way you can see what was actually involved in its destruction. So apparently, as you can see in the video, it appears that Ukrainian MLRSs may have been operating near this mall, but I can't really tell if that's the same building or not. And nonetheless, when you actually watch the missile strike here in a second, it doesn't look like it's going for the parking lot where they were at. It looks like it's going for another side of the building right on it, like right under the skyscraper that we saw in the last video. So this is kind of like random footage, I'm supposing, because it's not really near the mall. Now we can see the mall that we were looking at earlier. And as you can see, here in the front, where this missile's about to land, you'll see that in a second, but there are no military vehicles up here, it looks like. It looks like these are just normal civilian cars, yet they've picked out this spot to hit with a missile. So, here's the missile strike here in a second, right here. And you can see that it's completely leveled and decimated the front of the mall, where there were absolutely no, what would you say, military assets or targets there. It was just nothing but civilian vehicles in the mall. And so in the process of doing that, it looks like the entire mall burned down in the other video, and they airstruck a location that really was of no strategic importance whatsoever. It's just really, you know, once again, it's the Russians doing their normal criminal activities in Ukraine, just killing innocent civilians and attacking non-military targets. And so now we're going to move into the middle of Kyiv to show the last bit of news we've gotten today, which is another Russian airstrike, which I'll show y'all here. So this is kind of like a continuation of the last video, but I believe that this one... Correction, this is actually the same video. I'm sorry about that mistake, y'all. Apparently, I looked at both of these, and for some reason, in my tired state, I thought they were 2 different videos. So, sorry about that. That actually covers all the news that happened in Kyiv today that we were able to get on video. But, of course, there's always more news coming out. It's just that we don't have any video evidence to show to talk about it definitively. And so, if y'all have any sources for more news, join the Discord. Make sure to join that. The link is in the description below. And maybe you can share some news with us that we might be able to use on stream, maybe. We do that every once in a while, although it is kind of hard due to time constraints, but I will gladly accept some new footage and news if we can find it. And so, since we've covered that, we're now going to move on to the Chernihiv area. And once again, I have to give my usual disclaimer that nothing new has really happened in the Chernihiv area for quite some time, really. There's been, I mean, like, you know, there's been a couple of bombing raids and stuff like that on the city, but there hasn't been anything significant. There hasn't been any heavy firefights anywhere near Chernihiv anymore, which is suggesting to me that the Russians in that area have, of course, stalled, probably because of logistical issues, but we're not entirely sure. Maybe the Russians are just sitting back and trying to well, really, all I can assume is that they're trying to fix the logistical issues, really, because so far the information we gotten, and once again, this is all based off of the information we've gotten and the assumptions we can make off of that. It's entirely all based off of the information we've gotten, so I'm guessing that they're still trying to resupply the units up there, maybe get them back into fighting condition, but nonetheless, we can see that that's not going to be the case anytime soon, because here in this picture, we can see that some Russian supply vehicles were destroyed, and it appears from their scattered contents, they were carrying food and water. So I don't think the Russians will be ready to go anytime soon. It looks like some Russian soldiers will be going a little hungry today. So That being said, we've actually covered all the news in the northern area today. And so before we move on to the eastern front, the location unknowns in Kharkiv, and as well as Sumy, which didn't have anything happening today, we're going to answer some questions from the chat. And so what do we got, Matthew?
Okay, so good evening, everybody. We do have some very good questions that have come in for the night. The first one up is from Vicky Ramirez, puts in a donation of $20. They say, love the channel. You're so great at fundraising, and will you consider doing one for supporting pets in Ukraine? Thanks again.
We have been looking into different kinds of fundraisers. We did look into that one a little bit, but I have to make sure that it's under the GuideStar registry and it has an EIN number because that's the only way that YouTube allows me to donate to them. I know that everyone's like, well, if it's still a charitable organization, then why can't you donate to them still? And the thing is that if I don't do it through YouTube, I'll probably have to hire accountants, which I actually don't have the money for. But that's a whole other complicated thing. But I would have to hire accountants, and I just can't find the money for that. And on top of that, it would start eating into the actual amount of donations because they would have to be paid somehow. And so YouTube makes it a lot easier for me. So I have to work through their GuideStar website and the registered EIN numbers that are for those for those organizations in a way. But I will be looking into that. So if it does have an EIN number, that may be one of the future fundraisers that we do. But I thank you nonetheless for the support and the super chat because it means a lot to us that we can do so much to help out people around the world. And so I thank you once again. And that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question is from Jacob Sibula. He puts in a donation of $20. He says, is war on Russia's side turning into a war of attrition? Russia knows that they can wait because they can replace their equipment losses versus where Ukraine does not have that luxury. Longer war wages is more beneficial to Russia.
I'm not really sure if a longer war would be beneficial to Russia because I believe that the sooner they end this war, and it also may be dependent on a regime change, but the faster the sanctions will end. And right now, the sanctions are wreaking havoc on their economy. As we saw yesterday, they're having to fight for simple stuff now in Russia, like sugar and grains. So I don't really think that they would like this war to go on much longer because it's wreaking havoc on their kind of like domestic supply chains, I guess you could call them, to a huge degree because grain is one of like the basic tenants tenements. I don't really know how to exactly say that, but it's one of the basic aspects of modern life is grains. When you think about anything like, well, really anything. Like think about it. There's either potatoes, or there's grains, or there's something kind of in between. And so if you're missing one of those, like one of those two basic food types, things are starting to get severe. And so I don't really think that they're going to be wanting to have a longer war because that could start wreaking havoc on their civilian population. It could start leading to famines, maybe. It could start leading to a lot of stuff. We already know that the Russians aren't able to import the kind of medicines that are needed to keep some people alive in hospital. So we do know that those people will probably, unfortunately, die soon due to the sanctions. But apparently that's a price that the Russian government is willing to pay to try and win this war in a way and maybe screw over their country in the long term. So I don't really think that would be in their advantage, but maybe they've decided that that's the best thing they can do to try and at least win the war somehow. Because if they are trying to go for a quick success in a short war, they've kind of already almost lost that window at this point in a way, because they're nearing the length of time it took for us to invade and take over Iraq. But at this point, they only control about 7% of the country's land. And I believe that also includes Donetsk and Luhansk in that figure. But I thank you very much for the super chat nonetheless. It's a very good question. It's just that I'm not really sure. I mean, like, if they're weighing the civilian side, it's not in their favor. If they're weighing the actual military and strategic side of things more so than the civilian side, then it would be in their advantage. So that's kind of like the short answer nonetheless. But I thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next donation comes in from Studio 2000 Productions, puts in a donation of $20, and he says, the Enforcer rocks.
Thank you very much. I do enjoy being a rock. I would much prefer to be a stone sometimes. But I thank you very much nonetheless for the super chat. And that being said, thank you for the support once again. It does help us run this channel, and that's an incredibly important thing. And with that being said, we're now going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question is from Sir Caps. He also puts in a donation of $20. He says, are there any Ukrainian troops on the border of Belarus in case they decide to enter the war?
I'm not really sure. And on top of that, we usually don't like to talk about Ukrainian positions and tactics because if the Russians don't know it, which they may already, they do also have satellite pictures as well, it would give them a little bit of an upper hand. And so while me kind of like containing the spread of information on Ukrainian positions, locations, and plans only stymies the Russian information a little, probably not at all. I do not really like to talk about that too much because it could give the Russians an upper hand in some sort of way. And so I'm not really sure if they are there. They may not be there at all. One can hope, though, that if the Belarusians were to start pushing through the western side of the country, that the Ukrainians would be ready to meet them in a way, if you see what I'm saying. But I'm sorry I can't really answer that question. We don't really talk about Ukrainian positions on here because, that's a bit of a security issue for Ukraine if that was to be known publicly. And also, we don't have that kind of information stated as well because the Ukrainians don't make the positions of their military known. So thank you very much for the super chat and the question. It's a pretty good question, but unfortunately, we don't really have an answer for it. So I'm sorry about that, but we're going to move on to two more questions, and then we're going to move on to the Eastern Front.
Okay, so the next question is from John Dilly, 1974. He puts in a donation of $20. He says, I love the channel. Keep up the good work. Breaking Point's YouTube channel today said that the hypersonic missiles were a flex to intimidate the West due to the fact the West does not have them nor can defend against them.
I believe it is. That's a pretty good way of looking at it. It's kind of a not really to use like modern terminology, but it's kind of a not so humble flex, I guess. I'm not really good at using modern terms, but what that was pretty much meant to do was to just strike fear into the West in a way, and also Ukraine as well, because the hypersonic missiles actually can reach speeds up to Mach 10 before they hit their target. So not only are they kind of a damaging weapon in terms of explosive yield, but then the pure speed of the the hypersonic missile also makes it a kinetic weapon as well. It's also also reportedly able to kind of like evade ground fire in a way. I'm not really sure how it does that. I think it may just be doing that by its raw speed. But nonetheless, I do think that was nothing more than a flex. I'm sure that since the hypersonic missiles were just developed a few years ago, there's very few of them that have been produced. And so this may be equivalent, like in an analogy, to Russia pulling out an Su-57 and using it in Ukraine just to send a message because they hardly have any Su-57s. But that's why I'm thinking that's entirely my opinion as well, because we don't really know how the Russians have manufactured these hypersonic missiles, like to what degree they have. So that's kind of all based on my opinion of how Russian development programs have gone, because we've looked at the T-14 Armata, which is their newest tank, and the Su-57, and they've only produced about a baker's dozen of each. And so going off of that, you can probably assume that they've only produced a baker's dozen of hypersonic missiles as well, because they're still trying to sort out the issues with them, much like they are with the Su-57 and the T-14 Armata. But I thank you very much for the support to the channel, and also thank you very much for liking the streams. We always try and put in a lot of work and effort into this. Sometimes it is pretty tiring, so I do thank everyone for the support because it also helps our channel keep running. And so, with that being said, we're now going to move on to the final question, and then we're going to move on to the Eastern Front.
All right, and the next question is from Coffee Break, puts in a donation of $14. He says, this is my nightly routine now. Thank you very much. Also, what do you think it will take to get NATO to enter into Ukraine? Do you think it'll happen soon?
I think for NATO to enter Ukraine, it's going to take a pretty good deal. NATO really at this point, because looking at it today, I kind of took a step back and really looked at it and saw how close are we really to war. And NATO, really, that's kind of like led by the United States. So, NATO is kind of like an extension of the United States in a way. They're trying to carefully negotiate their way around this war, because if they don't, it could, of course, lead the entire the entire European world into a third world war, which really wouldn't end well for either side, most likely because it would probably inevitably result in some kind of nuclear holocaust of a sort. So they're trying to carefully negotiate their ways around this, and so I'm not really sure if anything could actually draw them into this war. But then again, something could. I mean, like, obviously there will be a tipping point for them. Like if a missile landed inside of Poland and killed dozens of civilians, that may be a thing. And I also kind of revisited my idea of if it just killed a few people in Poland, would they go to war then? And I was thinking not quite, because in the Cold War there was a MiG-23, I believe, that took off from East Germany, and then the pilot ejected out of it when it took off from the runway because of some engine troubles or something like that, and the jet continued to fly, flew into Western territory, and then rammed into a house and killed a boy. And so, if we were going off of these, and the Cold War was much more tense than this is as far as West versus East goes. And that wasn't enough to cause the entire Western world to go to war. That was kind of like a thing that everyone explained away. I was like, oh, it's unfortunate in a way. And it kind of was. It was really more of an accident. And then again, a Russian missile hitting Poland would be an accident. So I'm not really sure if that would be the tipping point for the West to start gearing for war. They would probably try and explain away, be like, oh, it was an unfortunate accident. Article 5 really isn't a thing. They were probably trying to overlook Article 5. And so I believe that's probably the stance that they would take. But I do think that if we call up our politicians enough, our government officials and so on, and tell them that we would like for the West to make a more militant stance, not going to war. I'm not saying that I'm just calling up like senators and representatives and begging them to just start obliterating Russians. I'm saying that if we start showing a large military presence in NATO countries like Romania and Poland, I think that that would probably lead to Russia starting to second guess their decisions and maybe waver in this war. And so I thank you very much for the super chat and the support, and I hope I answered that question pretty well. And so that being said, we're now going to move on to the Eastern Front and the news we've gotten from there, and then we'll answer some questions in between the Eastern Front and the Southern Front. So moving on to the location unknowns, we actually have a small amount of them today, as many as yesterday, which is a good thing because that means that we're able to batten down a lot of the locations where the stuff is happening around the country. But we can see more cruise missiles in flight from Russia here in this video. I'll show this to y'all right now. I think I just said Russia and I meant to say Ukraine. Sorry about that. I'm kind of a little tired tonight. But anyways, you can see that the cruise missile flew over, and it kind of looks like he's on a beach. So this may be in a coastal location near Odessa, but I wasn't able to actually get that information confirmed. So it's in the location unknown section for now. We're now going to move on to the next bit of news, which we can see that Ukrainian artillery is getting used pretty thoroughly right here. So I'm going to show you all this. And you also might notice that this is the same peon artillery that the Russians were using several days ago. And of course, we always have to note that the Ukrainians and the Russians do use the same equipment by and large because, Ukraine is a post-Soviet country, and so they inherited most of their equipment from the former Soviet Union. And so they do use most of the same equipment most of the time. But that being said, I'm going to let y'all watch the video.
А з початку вторгнення Росії в нашу державу цей калібр почав далі застосовуватись і виконує в повному обсязі свої задачі, наносить дуже великих і максимальних втрат противнику. Переважно працюємо по колонам і скупчення їхньої техніки, а особливо їхнє забезпечення – це паливомастильні матеріали, де вони там скупчуються. Працюємо 24/7 щоденно, як днем, так і вночі відпрацюємо всі задачі. І за працювання нашої артилерії, наших всіх артилерійських підрозділів, противник не може прорвати нашу лінію оборони. Наша задача – далі підтримувати наших товаришів, які на передньому краї. Ми будемо максимально працювати з ними щільно і цього ворога, скота, будемо виганяти з нашої держави, щоб його тут не...
Is it just me? I have to rewind this real quick. But does this look almost like perfect grass? It's like paper mache grass. I would love to know if this is a sod. Like, I know this is a war and everything, but the grass is just completely unbelievable to me. I would love to know if this is like a sod farm or something, because this is the best looking grass I have ever seen, and I really have to appreciate the quality of it. But nonetheless, I also have to appreciate the quality of the Ukrainian artillery. It looks like they're well put together, incredibly competent. and they're using the big guns, of course, these days. So I'm going to let the video keep
держави,
going.
щоб його тут і духу не було до самих кордонів. Не переживайте, ми вас захистимо, все буде добре, Україна переможе. Прорвати нашу лінію, наші кордони ми не дозволимо. Все, що було втрачено тимчасово, ми це все повернемо. Ми держимо, все буде добре, не переживайте.
I gotta tell you something. I mean, I'm a big fan of artillery just because it's so impressive to watch. Also, to give a little bit of like personal information about me in a way, I am a reenactor, and so I do that every once in a while. And I have been around cannons when they're fired, and I just have to say, like when you're there, even if they don't actually have a shot inside the cannon, the raucous shake of the earth and everything around you that occurs when any like kind of artillery is fired is just so impressive and so neat in a way that it's just very cool to witness. And so I have great admiration for the artillery because it's not to like get opinionated or anything. I know this is like something small to give an opinion on, but it is an incredibly cool bit of kit, and it's also cool to see them using the 203mm guns, because we've seen that the Ukrainians have started to use their actual artillery pieces that are larger caliber more and more as the war has gone on. They went from using grads at the beginning to now they're pulling out 155mm guns, 203mm guns. They're using Tachkas. I mean, like, they're really starting to use heavy artillery and ballistic missiles, which is telling us that maybe they're being pulled out now to support counteroffensives and counterattacks in a way. So now we're going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a Stugna P in action. Going to let y'all see this real quick. It's always neat stuff. We've seen a lot of Stugna P footage, and honestly, it starts to look similar because, you know, it's a black and white screen, you're looking at the same thing, but it's always good to see that Russian armor is being destroyed. It shows that the Ukrainians are always keeping up the upper hand in a way on the Russians, and at least destroying more of them versus the amount of equipment and personnel that's being destroyed on the Ukrainian side. So without saying too much, I'm just going to let y'all see the video. And of course, we'll see them cheer at the end. They always cheer.
Есть. Надеюсь. Да, есть.
he said yes and yes. He said yes in either Russian or Ukrainian, because I think da is yes in both languages, and then he said yes in English. I love how he was like doing that for like both audiences, both the West and like, you know, his home country. He was like da yes. That'd be like German saying ja yes or something like that. It's really funny. They weren't as enthusiastic as the last people we've seen on video to destroy a Russian army vehicle, but nonetheless, they're always happy whenever they do it. And I'm glad to see that they keep on giving a staunch resistance to the Russians due to the ATGMs that they're fielding, whether it be a Javelin or a Stugna. We're starting to see a lot of Stugnas being used, which I may take as that the Ukrainians are starting to field Javelins less and less, or maybe the supplies to operate Javelins is less and less readily available. I don't really have any information to back that up, though, because as far as I know, the U.S. is almost sending them regular shipments of Javelin missiles and maybe a few extra CLUs as well. So I don't really have a lot of information to back that up, but we are starting to see less and less of Javelins being used and more of Stugnas being used. But then again, that may just be because there's less videos being taken of the Javelins. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, and we can see that artillery is hitting the Russians in an unknown location, but it hits a tank and a logistics truck. As you can see there, it hit near a structure. It looks like some kind of house, perhaps. And there was a truck down there and a tank. Also, you can see a little guy scurrying along the foundation of the house. We'll watch that again. See right there, he's the little black dot. It looks like he's running off from the truck. I haven't seen the tank yet, but we do know that the truck is there. And then I believe that's the tank there where my mouse cursor is. I don't know if they got them both at the same time. I didn't see anything hit the Russian tank, but maybe they got both of them in kind of like one fell swoop, or they got it after the video. But they did take out the truck at least. We know that for sure. Another thing that I'd like to point out is that while they didn't get the tank in that video, and maybe they didn't get the tank ever, maybe they just had to withdraw the drone and they never killed the tank. The thing is that logistics vehicles are always, in my opinion, more important than any combat vehicle that can be destroyed, because trucks are in limited supply for the Russians. As far as we know, they only have about 4,000 trucks, which is an incredibly small number for the Russians to have. And so what I'm thinking, and what the math showed when we did this a while ago, is that the Russians just don't have enough trucks to supply all of their units in Ukraine. And so they can only supply about 62% of their units, based off of my kind of rough calculations, in the Ukraine theater. And that's out of like 220,000 they fielded. That's not the entire army. Like if they were to bring in all 630,000 of them, that's just the parts of the army that are involved in this invasion. They can only supply about 65% of them from the information I was able to gather. And so going off of that, we can assume that a logistics truck is going to be far more valuable to the Russians and far more valuable for the Ukrainians to destroy than a tank, because the tanks can only run with gas, ammo, and food. And if they don't get one of those, then things will start to fall apart, inevitably. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news, and we can see here that there was another destroyed BMP-2, and I'll show you all this video.
Работа 58-й бригады.
As we can see here, is just nothing but debris strewn about the battlefield from this BMP-2. And it was pretty much decimated. I don't know exactly what hit it. Maybe this is the one we saw earlier. Oh, it skipped forward a decent bit. Maybe this is the BMP that we saw earlier
Да нет его.
that they hit.
Красиво. Красиво, мне нравится.
But I mean, like, this thing is shredded apart.
Бэха.
Like, there's nothing that exists of this thing that looks like a BMP anymore. It's just a mangle of steel. So whatever they hit it with, it must have been large.
Двоечка.
So it's always good to see. It's always good to see more Russian vehicles destroyed. That's less that the Russians can field, and more that they'll have to pull in from somewhere else if they want to make sure that the units keep at their fighting strength. We're now going to move on to the next bit of news, and we can see some Ukrainians in a trench taking heavy fire.
Ебать в ушах звенит, да?
Блять, пацаны живы.
Фу, я не знаю.
So, as you could hear in the distance, we couldn't see it in the video, but it sounded like they were being shelled, and I'm assuming, now this is a very, very big assumption here, because trenches could be everywhere at this point. But one thing I am assuming is that we know that there is heavy trench work around the Donetsk-Luhansk area, so maybe that was somewhere in the Donbass, and that was being filmed from one of those trenches that have been used for almost a decade at this point. And they were getting bombarded there, because we do know that the Russians are trying to break through the heavily defended area around Donetsk and Luhansk. Yet they haven't really met much success, as far as we know, rather than up here around the Luhansk area, where they're apparently have approached Severodonetsk. But we're not entirely sure about that, but we do know that they were taking artillery fire in that video. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the Russians loot a gas station. This isn't new to anyone, and this should be pretty obvious at this point, that this is kind of suggesting that the Russians have run out of logistical abilities, and now soldiers are having to take it upon themselves to find food any way they can. And so we can see here that they got a little creative. It looks like they pulled up the BMD for a little bit of gas, and then they went inside for some snacks. So I'm going to let y'all watch the video. I also remembered, I said this a while ago, and I said I don't know what kind of uniform that is right there. I believe it's called the Gorka uniform. I'm not entirely sure, though. If someone could double check that information for me and let me know, I'd be incredibly appreciative. But as far as I know, that's like a Gorka 5 uniform. And I tried to label that a couple of days ago when we saw some Chechens in a firefight, and I said I don't know what that is. I forgot the, well, I did know what it was, but I forgot the name of it. But I believe that is the name. So now I'm going to show you all the video. Whole crew climbs out. I guess they leave the tank completely unattended. Farmers out there probably trying to rip the thing apart. We see the Russians are robbing the Ukrainians of their money and also snatching food off of the displays. Like, this guy's got a bucket. Like, this guy is serious. Like, this guy's got a whole bucket and everything. He's going through and he's cleaning house. Probably because they're so hungry. And hopefully they continue to stay hungry and the Ukrainians keep doing their job and wipe out the logistical supplies. So, all I can say is that watching Russians loot a gas station, this is kind of like my opinion on this, it's a good thing because it lets you know that they're not getting the kind of food they need, or otherwise they wouldn't be taking it upon themselves to pretty much loot for food and kind of live off the land in some kind of 19th century style way of warfare. Or really World War II. I mean, like, the Germans also had kind of like a live off the land philosophy, which worked poorly for them because the Russians scorched everything from where the Germans started Operation Barbarossa to pretty much the gates of Moscow. So they didn't really have a lot of land or anything on the land to live off of. But it looks like the Russians may be running into the same situation as well, because they didn't just invade during any time of the year. They invaded during the Rasputitsa and also the sowing season, which the sowing season and kind of like, well, the planting season, I guess that's a better term to call it, but the planting season in Ukraine is now, and so there's absolutely no food, like nothing, no vegetables or anything hardly growing in Ukraine, and the farmers are going out right now and starting to sow the fields with seeds so that way they'll grow and they can harvest things in the fall and winter. So the Russians have absolutely no food, and on top of that, the whole entire land is a quagmire. So even if they wanted to go into farms and try and manage to take some kind of food, whatever it was, and eat it, there's really no option for them to do that. So now we're going to move on to the next bit of news. We can see here there was 2 Kamazes that were captured. One apparently has an auto cannon on the back of it, but here's the video. Take a look at that. Very interesting. We see that both of them are being carried by a Ukrainian tow truck, military tow truck. And so it's good to know. They call it a logistics truck, and then they call it like a AA truck, I guess? And that's really weird to me. I didn't think that in this day and age, the Russians would be using kind of like hand-aimed, hand-guided anti-air equipment. Let me rewind that and make sure that I'm saying that correctly. I don't know if that has a computer targeting system on it or a radar, but I'd assume, considering that it looks so archaic and simple, that it wouldn't, because we've seen those similar kind of autocannons used in Syria on video, and those have to be hand aimed, and the operator has to kind of like lead the target and kind of figure that out by learning or trial by error. So I don't believe that this is actually computer guided in a way. So that's really interesting to me that the Russians are using something like that. In this modern day and age, it kind of seems archaic to be using against jets that can go close to the speed of sound, usually in normal combat conditions, and Mach 2 in certain circumstances, although you won't find that in any kind of close air support role aircraft. Anyways, moving on from that, we can see here from the Kyiv Independent, we've once again gotten more updated Russian losses. The Kyiv Independent is now claiming that the Russians have lost 15,000 troops, 97 planes. They are 3 planes away from losing an entire 100 aircraft, 121 helicopters, 498 tanks. They are close to losing their 500th tank. They may have already lost it at the time of the stream because this number came out a few hours ago. 240 artillery pieces, 1,535 APCs, 80 MLRSs, 3 boats, 969 vehicles, 60 fuel tanks, 24 drones, 45 anti-aircraft warfare systems, so I'm assuming that those are probably like Pantsers or Tors, and 13 special equipment vehicles. What's the really interesting number to me is that they've lost 969 vehicles. Now, if we were to cut Tigers and armored cars out of the picture, which can probably make up a substantial amount of that number, and we were to assume that that's entirely logistics vehicles, based off of what we know, that's probably about a quarter of the original supply vehicles that they entered the country with. So consider that, and then add in that they were already hardly supplying more than half of their army at the beginning, and we can start to see the idea that if they're not commandeering civilian vehicles or domestic vehicles in Russia at an incredibly high rate, because the domestic vehicles in Russia are usually much smaller, can only carry a smaller load, we can get the idea that this is probably not going to turn out well for the Russians logistically anymore, because the amount of vehicles destroyed alone is massive, not looking at the tanks or the APCs, which is also impressive in their own right. Also, the aircraft is really interesting as well, because while it's a kind of smaller number compared to everything else, an aircraft is much more rare and much more expensive, incredibly more expensive than almost every kind of ground vehicle or ground equipment you can find. So losing an aircraft isn't really more about the sheer number of them, it's about the cost of them. So that being said, really interesting news that we've gotten in the location unknowns today. And so now we're going to start moving on down towards Sumi. Now I have to give my usual disclaimer that I'll give at Chernihiv and Sumi at this point, and that's that we've gotten no information from Sumi to indicate that that anything in any way is happening there at all anymore. It appears that the city has fallen relatively quiet. I'm assuming that's because the Russians have stopped putting pressure on the city, so I'm guessing that the Ukrainians are having some time to mount defenses in there and maybe prepare for what's coming in the future. But at the moment, it doesn't look like much has been going on in Sumi, which is great news. It's telling us that the Russians are maybe having a problem committing large amounts of offensives like they were at the original part of the war. Speaking of which, this is a perfect time to revisit this map with all the nice, beautiful proposed plans and front lines on it and stuff, because the Russians appear to be doing limited offensives now. They're not pushing everywhere like they were in the first week of the war. They're now pushing in very few places like Kyiv. They're also pushing in Kharkiv. Well, I say pushing, it's kind of, I'll explain later why I'm saying pushes. We'll just call them offensives. Pushing Mariupol, and also fighting heavily around Mykolaiv, although it doesn't look like they're pushing that. It looks like they're just fighting to hold the land that they got over the past few days. And so we see that areas like Sumi and the area up here around Konotov and some of the areas around the Donbass have fallen relatively quiet. And so what I'm assuming has happened here is that because of the logistical issues I'm talking about, the Russians aren't using all of their units to 100%. Because if they did, it would eat up a whole bunch of supplies, and they just simply don't have the ability to supply these units anymore. And so they've kind of reverted to Plan B, because at the beginning of the war, they just actually rolled units straight through the cities, I guess thinking that they'd roll right through them out to the other side and just keep going. And then they saw that that wasn't working, and so now they've reverted to Plan B, which is mass bombardments of these cities by artillery bombings and so on. And then, in very limited amounts of areas on the front, they push into these cities, hopefully capture them because they'll be decimated to nothing but rubble at that point, and then they will be able to push out through to the other side and continue their offensive out to the remaining areas of Ukraine. It doesn't look like that's working too well for them, because we can see that the counteroffensives up here, and I'll flip back to this map so it's got kind of like the simplified view. The counteroffensives up here are actually pushing the Russians back everywhere as far as we know. And if the Ukrainians or the Russians breached the Irpin River, we know that this will be the front line up here for quite some time, because it'll be hard to fjord vehicles across that floodplain. Down here, that's not the case, as far as I know. I think the Irpin River, that's the Bucha River. Where's the Irpin River? Well, actually, it looks like they both form into the same one. So this whole entire area down here may be flooded as well. And so we can assume, since the Ukrainians and the Russians will kind of have like free reign over this area, that the Ukrainians will just continue this counteroffensive here and start pushing back this bulge that kind of reached down to the E40 highway for a time. So that's kind of like my standpoint on what the current situation looks like for the Ukrainians. It actually looks pretty good based off the logistical information that we have, although there may be some stuff missing, and this is always subject to change. And this is, once again, my opinion, so it's not well, my opinion based off of like my assumptions and knowledge that we currently have about how the war is going. So a lot of things can change, and so don't quote me on that, and don't take that as like the actual name of the game right now, because the name of the game could be different. Although at the beginning of this war, I actually did get a lot of stuff on the dot, so I'm assuming that it's probably based in some kind of knowledge, but then again, you know, things always change, and, you know, there's always a time where that information could not be true. And so I'm going to go ahead and preface and say it's mostly true, but then again, there may not be any credibility to it, and the Russians do something entirely different, or the situation is entirely different, and we don't have enough information to go another way. But anyways, we're going to move on down to the area of Kharkiv, where we've had a bit more news today. We can see that there was some kind of loud gunfire, perhaps, in Kharkiv. Actually, it seems like AA fire, but nonetheless, it's pretty good to hear that the Ukrainians in Kharkiv are still churning out the fire. It sounds like all the guns are still running, and so we know that the Ukrainians haven't lost the city. And we already know that for sure because the Russians have pretty much pulled all the way out of the city, and now they're just bombarding it from afar because the Ukrainians kind of scared them a little last time they entered that town. Well, city, really. So we're going to move on to the next bit of news inside of Kharkiv, which we can see artillery in Kharkiv. I'm going to show you all this here. This is apparently Russian artillery hitting the city. And you hear it off in the distance as these people are walking around.
ебало нахуй, смотрите. Что это такое, блядь? Вон, смотри. Ебать. А мы сейчас на ракеты идем. Мы на ракеты. Еще летят, смотри.
So you can hear there's car alarms going off, so the explosion must have been close.
Смотри. Уебал сейчас нахуй. Еще. Ебать. Заебали нахуй.
So, very interesting stuff. We don't know exactly what that artillery was hitting, but nonetheless, we can get the picture that whatever it was hitting, it must not be something good. It's probably a civilian area from what we could tell, but then again, Kharkiv is a large city, and so we're not entirely sure. So hopefully no one that was a civilian was injured or killed in this, and hopefully the soldiers that may be being hit by that artillery were in good cover and didn't get injured, or a lot of them didn't get killed. And so we're now going to move on to the last bit of news we've gotten in Kharkiv today, where we can see some Ukrainian T-64 BVs in action. I'm going to show you all this video. It's very short. Now, this is really rare. We've hardly ever seen actual videos of the Ukrainian T-64s at work, or really any Ukrainian tanks at work. And now we saw a video of it finally showing that they actually are being used, because for a while I'd only seen a couple of videos of destroyed Ukrainian tanks and we never actually saw them being used. And I was kind of getting concerned, thinking, what if they're not using those? Like, the ATGMs are being used incredibly effectively, but the tanks aren't being utilized to their maximum potential. But it appears in that video they may be put to their maximum potential in some places, or maybe all over, and we're just not able to see that footage because the Ukrainians are closely guarding where their, the positions of their units are and what they're doing, and trying to release that information days later so that way it's not compromising their security. So, we've actually covered all the news on the Eastern Front now. There wasn't much today, as has been the norm for multiple days at this point, which I consider very good, because it shows that the Russians just are not doing as much as they were during the first weeks of the war. We'll move on to a bit of interesting news that came out of Moscow today, which is actually on this map, but we'll get to it. That kind of says that things may be subject to change in the future, although today it doesn't appear that it's done anything important. So that being said, we've actually covered all the news on the Eastern Front, and before we move on to the Southern Front, we're going to take some more questions from the chat and see what we got. So what do we got, Matthew?
Okay, so first up, I do have some answers to your questions you had earlier. So our translator said that yes is a word of confirmation. In English, that would be the equivalent of saying we got him. And da, it means yes in Russian. And tak means yes in Ukrainian. And also, you'd asked a question about a soldier wearing a uniform. We are told that that is a Gorka 4 that he was wearing.
Oh, okay, it wasn't that far off then. It was a Gorka of some kind. I just wasn't really sure if it was a Gorka 5 or what, but I'm glad that I finally got that right. So that being said, what do we got, Matthew?
Okay, and first off, I just want to recognize a couple of larger donations. First off, Jose Sosa, he puts in a donation for a total of $100. Jose, we certainly appreciate the support. And also, we have a $40 donation from John Rutkai. He says, "Peace, brothers. I love your content, and peace."
Well, I thank y'all both very much for the support. It helps our channel a lot and makes sure that we're able to keep running. And it of course means a lot to me because running this takes a lot of time every day. It takes multiple hours, and I actually have not gotten a break since the start of this war. And so it means a lot to me because it lets me know that the amount of time and effort I'm putting into this isn't in vain, and I can start focusing on a further scope and scale of this channel in the future. And so I thank y'all all very much. It means a lot to me that people continuously support the channel. And so that being said, we're now going to move on to the questions.
Okay, and the first question up is from Fernando Sanchez. He puts in a donation of $20. He says, looking at the state of the Russian army, could we extrapolate this poor level of maintenance, readiness, and capability to their nuclear deterrence efforts?
I actually did touch on that a while back. It was about a week ago or so. But I said that considering that the Russians don't have a budget to really maintain all of the armored vehicles in their army and so on, I said it would probably be safe to assume that their nuclear arsenal is in about as bad of shape as their, conventional arsenal. And so I do believe that this may be able to extend over to the Russian arsenal in a way, because as you may or may not know, the U.S. nuclear arsenal isn't in perfect state either. And so, considering that the United States puts around $662 billion into national defense every year, and our nuclear silos in some cases are in disrepair, I can easily assume that the Russian nuclear arsenal, considering that they run their entire defense budget on around $55 billion, $60 billion a year, is probably much worse off than ours. So yes, I could say that considering that the poor maintenance and quality of their actual ground units would reflect the quality of their nuclear units in a way. But then again, that's entirely my opinion. I'm just going based off of the information we have and our assumptions. So don't quote me on it, but that's what I'm thinking at the moment. So I thank you very much once again for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question up is from none of your beeswax for a donation of $20. They say, why haven't we seen delaying action out of these now besieged cities before they were completely surrounded to keep the Ukrainian forces in the field? Once surrounded, they are cut off with little hope of a relief column.
Well, first off, that's none of your beeswax. I'm just playing. But the reason why there's been no encirclements of the major cities, at least, is because the Ukrainians have been putting up a staunch resistance around them. We do know that the Russians did try to encircle Kharkiv, and it appears that they did succeed for a short time, but they weren't actually able to funnel in enough units to make this encirclement as sound as it could be. Apparently, it was just breakthrough units that apparently circled around the city, kind of met up, and there was like reports of these units moving around Kharkiv, and so the mayor of Kharkiv declared over Twitter that the city had been besieged and was completely surrounded by the Russians. And then about a day or two later, that was actually clarified. It was apparently breakthrough convoys. They destroyed them, and so then the front lines returned to this condition. So for a while, just to go back to this map, this area here around Kharkiv was actually red, the area in green, because that was what I was saying the Russians would probably do, and they tried, and then they failed. So in some cases, they did try to encircle the city, and it is a much smarter thing to do to encircle them and cut them off from supplies, much like it was what's happening in Mariupol. But the Russians have not had the liberty of doing that at Kharkiv, Sumy, or Kyiv, just because the Ukrainian resistance around these cities has been so staunch. So I hope that answers your question. That's about the best one I can give. Also, I think your name's pretty neat. It's a pretty cool little name. So hope you like the little joke I made at the beginning. And that being said, thank you very much for your support once again. And we're moving on to the next question.
All right, and the next question is from S. Moore. With a donation of $20. They say, was there an attack on a Russian warship recently? Chechen unit lost a battle today. Odessa beachhead will be slaughter for Russian.
I do not know if there has been a landing today, but we did see that there was some kind of naval fire around Odessa, which we will touch on a little bit later in the stream, so make sure to stay around for that. But we don't really know of any kind of naval landings that have occurred in that area as of now. We do know that it'll probably be a meat grinder on that beach because the Odessans have prepared heavily for this incoming invasion. And so, as far as that goes, I don't think it'll be an easy time for the Russians in that area. I don't really know about the Russian ship that sank off the coast. I haven't really heard anything about that information, but if we do get any news on that, I'll make sure to try and update the news as soon as possible to say that that did happen. But as of now, I don't actually have any news of that. Let's see, what else was the... Oh yeah, also the Chechens losing a battle. I have not heard a specific account of that happening to them today, but then again, they lose almost everywhere. Like, there's apparently Katowice active in the Bucha Irpin Hostomel area. They got pushed out, and then in Mariupol, we just keep on seeing the Katowites that are down there just getting it handed to them daily by that amazing BTR 4 crew that looks like they're playing Battlefield 4 instead of actually fighting a war. They make it look really easy to swipe Katowites off the land and just shove them around everywhere. So I would believe that the Katowites have probably been beat somewhere, but I don't exactly know where because I didn't get any specific news saying that they had been decisively defeated somewhere today. But I do thank you very much for that information. I hope I've answered your questions to a pretty good degree. And once again, thank you very much for the support. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and up next we have a question from John Person. He also puts in a donation of $20, and he says, how long do you think it will be until Ukrainian farmers tow the entire Russian Navy back to their farms?
I would assume somewhere in between the beginning of the planting season and the end of it. So I'm assuming that probably around the end of the month. Once again, that's just a joke. Not really. I like the joke too. It's a pretty good one. So thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and I just want to recognize a $20 donation from Russell Wheeler. Thank you very much, Russell. We do appreciate it. The next question is from DGP Holy Hand Grenade with a donation of $20. They say, it seems like NATO is moving. Poland and Slovakia are pushing for a peacekeeping mission in Ukraine. The US, France, and UK are looking at options to force a no-fly zone over humanitarian corridors.
Very interesting. I'm glad that you shared that with us. I believe that the whole thing with Poland and Slovakia trying to bring peacekeeping forces into Ukraine will probably fall flat because the United States and all the other countries that are probably, well, they are members of NATO, will probably have a problem with it, considering that may draw them into the war and they may not be so willing to do that. And as to the no-fly zone things, it's pretty much become clear, at least from the United States perspective, that a no-fly zone will not be accomplished by us or any of our efforts. So I'm not really sure if that would become a thing in the future, although it could, who knows. Maybe there will be something that happens in Ukraine that's unforgivable, and we will inch that much closer to doing the right thing, although it will be dangerous to do, and will actually help out the Ukrainians in some way, shape, or form. So I thank you very much for the information. It helps us out a decent bit, and it's good to know. So I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question is from Andrew J. He puts in a donation of $20 as well, and he says, if Russia launches cruise missiles from the Black Sea, does NATO have the capability to destroy them when they pass over NATO territory of Romania?
I'm not really sure if they would. Of course, everyone has kind of like anti-missile batteries, but I don't know if there's any active in Romania, or if they would be used. I feel like they probably would, of course, because it would be kind of common sense if they have them to use them. But the question is, do we actually have any deployed there at the moment? Any NATO country, for that matter. And depending on that answer, that would kind of give us the other answer of whether we would shoot down those missiles or not. I would assume that we would, because they would be flying over NATO airspace, and that may be kind of like veering into an Article 5, because that would start putting a lot of concern into the West. Usually when something like that happens, I don't really think anything like that would happen, because that would be so brazen it would practically be begging for a war. But usually whenever the Russians or the North Koreans or anyone say that they're firing a missile somewhere, like if it's a nuclear test or any kind of missile test, they always announce it worldwide that it'll be happening on a certain day at a certain time. And so when you actually see those videos on the news, those clips on the news like CNN or Fox, and they're talking about North Korea has fired a missile, the whole entire world usually knew about that at least a couple of hours or days in advance. So I don't believe that the Russians would do that without fair warning, and I don't really think they'd do it at all, as a matter of fact. But I do think if they did, we would shoot it down, and then that would cause some very aggressive actions, most likely from the West, much more aggressive than what we've already been doing with the sanctions. And so I thank you very much for the support, and I hope I answered that question pretty well. That being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is another question from Russell Wheeler. He puts in another $20, and Russell, once again, we appreciate the support. He says, do you feel any empathy for Russian deaths due to corrupt leadership?
I kind of do in a way, and I kind of. And it's a tricky question to answer because sometimes you can get caught up in the emotions of the war and watching so many civilians get killed. Because while y'all are always asking on stream, where are bodies? Where are the bodies? Oh, I see a lot of bodies because I have to actually search through a lot of stuff every day to find this information that I can put on stream that's safe for YouTube. And in the process, I see loads of dead people from every side, Ukrainians, Russians, and then civilians. But the number of dead people you see the most are civilians. And so sometimes you get caught up in the emotions of the war and you see all these dead civilians and you think, man, I feel really good knowing that a Russian got wiped out somewhere, regardless whether their government or their command is incompetent or not, or corrupt or not. You always feel kind of good about it, knowing that there's at least some sort of vengeance for all the Ukrainian citizens that have been killed who had no part in this war either way, and they just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. But at the same time, you can kind of empathize with some of the Russians because we know that their morale is low. Some of them don't want to fight. Some of them have been sabotaging their vehicles and shooting themselves in the foot to try and get out of service. So it's kind of a gray area. In some cases, you feel like the Russians got what was coming to them, and then in others, you're like, oh man, that's a poor guy, and I feel really sorry for what's happened to him, in a way. So it's kind of more of a complicated issue than just being a yes or a no in a way. But I thank you very much for the support and the question. It is an interesting question, but usually I don't try and let my opinions weigh in too much on the streams. I usually just try and report the news anyway. So I hope that helps you out with knowing where I'm coming from. But nonetheless, I thank you very much for the question and the support. It's always good to get support. It always helps out our channel. And so that being said, we're moving on to the next question, and we're going to answer two more, and then we're going to move on to the Southern Front.
Okay, and just to let you know, Enforcer, it appears that we have 25 super chats at the moment and a lot of other questions as well. So the next question is from Mandy with a donation of $36. They say, hi from Australia, and thank you for the deep dive into the war. It's hard to get decent info in OZ, only touched lightly by mainstream media. This is the best channel by far.
Well, I thank you very much. I'm very happy that a lot of people find a lot of worth in my news. Surprisingly enough, I always find it funny that I'm running this off of a $0 budget because I'm actually dirt poor right now and have no money to really work this off of, and I'm running a $0 budget channel, compiling this news the best way I can, and people find it better than national news in their home countries that has a multi-million-dollar budget, hundreds of people working behind the scenes, and 24-hour news a day. I'm very glad to know that there's actually a place in modern news and reporting for small channels like me to try and report unbiased news, and also to try and give a lot more fidelity in the information instead of just an overrun or something super simplified to get a lot of views and just, I guess, appease, like, quote unquote, and I'll explain what I'm saying by this, the idiots, because I feel like modern news thinks that everyone watching the news is some kind of idiot, and so they try and gear the news to where it's so simple that like a 4-year-old child can understand it in a way, because they never go into details about anything. Like they'll say something like, like the 203 millimeter peon gun, whatever the name is of it. They'll sit there and talk about it's a really big gun and it shoots really far and does a big boom. But in this channel, I can actually get into the size of the gun, its probable range, where it might be, and all that sort of stuff. And so I'm very glad that a lot of people appreciate that, and I'm very glad that I get a lot of support for this channel because it does mean a lot to me, and I hope that y'all get a lot out of it in return. So I thank you very much for the support, and I'm very glad that you like it. And so we're going to move on to the last question, and then we're going to start covering the news in the Southern Front.
Okay, I just want to take a moment to recognize two donations without comments. We have a $20 donation from Charles Close and also a $10 donation from 21st Century, a longtime channel supporter. So thank you very much for both of your donations. We appreciate the support once again. And moving on to the next question, for a $20 donation, Rabbit Squirrel Garage asks, do you think this is all, or do you think there will be a large wave come in and just forcefully take over, throwing the whole lot at them kind of thing?
I think I think now that Putin, I'll touch on this a little bit because this is important. Putin officially declared war last night, so it went from being a military operation, which was kind of like a sweet little way of saying we're going to war, to now they're actually saying they went to war. So I guess that's kind of like the ceremonious way of saying things have gone, in lack of better words, to shit, and we need to start pumping in a whole bunch of stuff to try and fix the situation. So I feel like maybe within the next few days there may be a massive influx of Russian troops in Ukraine. But the one thing that has to be importantly noted and remembered is that while they may enter Ukraine, their progress is going to be slow. Their logistics have already collapsed, and so adding more troops to that will only exacerbate that problem. On top of that, once they're there for a couple of days, they're going to run out of supplies. They'll be stuck there, and then they'll either have to wait for the Russian pipeline and railway units to build the railways and the pipelines to them to shorten the distance that the trucks are having to drive to deliver the cargo to the front, or they're just going to stall and then bog down again, but probably have taken a decent amount of land in the meantime. Probably maybe not taken Kyiv or Kharkiv, but we would see a lot more advancements throughout most of the country, like towards Zaporizhia, and maybe bypassing Mykolaiv to Kryvyi Rih or something like that. I put that down on this map over here in yellow, what their plans would be for the future. And I believe that if they were probably to pump in a bunch more units, they could probably achieve everything in yellow and green, but I'm not really sure. That's entirely my opinion. And then beyond that, they may just stall again, because the logistics would still be falling apart completely. So that's kind of my standpoint on it. And so I thank you very much for the question. It's a very good question. And considering that Putin has kind of officially declared war now, it shows that they'll maybe be diverting a whole lot more military resources to this problem. Regardless whether they work well or not, we'll just have to see in the coming days if that's the case. But nonetheless, thank you very much for the support. It always helps out our channel a lot, and I'm glad you like the content and you found it worthwhile to ask a question. So thank you very much. And that being said, we're now going to move on to the news in the Southern Front. So we're going to start off here at the city of Kramatorsk, and we're going to look at the use of white phosphorus. White phosphorus is something that was used in Vietnam a bit. We would kind of mix it in with the napalm to make sure that whatever we dropped the napalm on, it would burn even if they jumped it in water. It was a really questionable thing to use back then because it's pretty gruesome. It burns around 4,000 to 6,000 degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit, I believe. I'm not really sure, but you can get the picture that anything hotter than like 600 degrees Fahrenheit is pretty hot. And so this stuff will pretty much burn you alive if it gets on you, and it never stops burning pretty much. So you can see here in this video that they're shoveling up these rocks, and you can see that the white phosphorus is still burning in there. And so, knowing that that's white phosphorus, we know for sure that is a definite answer to the Russians committing war crimes. While thermobarics were kind of in a gray area, I guess, because the United States used them as well, the United States hasn't used white phosphorus for a good while. And when they do, we seriously... we deal with the situation seriously, and we usually lock up the commanders or the soldiers who used white phosphorus at Fort Leavenworth for quite a while. But considering that the Russians are now going to apparently start using this as a normal method in their warfare, that raises a lot more questions that we already had, but it raises a larger amount of them about how the Russians are going to start dealing with civilians, because you could drop that on the civilian area and it's going to burn every single civilian to death. And so once again, it's nothing but bad news coming out about how the Russians are conducting the war, once again completely overlooking the Geneva Conventions, the rules of war, and so on, and just going into complete savagery in what they're doing. So we're now going to move on to the area of the Donbass in the Donetsk-Luhansk area, and we can see today here that a TOS-1 was once again being used in the Donbass. I'm going to show you this video real quick. Once again, another more evidence of a war crime. We actually had someone give a super chat and say that using thermobarics isn't a war crime, but we actually found out that if it's used on civilians, it is a war crime. And so if this is being fired into a city and it's killing civilians, it's a war crime. So we're going to watch the video. And as you can see right there, once again, another TOS-1 being used. We don't know if it's targeting a city, but most likely is. And so, just once again, the Russians committing more war crimes in a way. So now we're going to move on to the area of Luhansk, where we can see two Su-25s flying at low altitude. We know that these are Russian. and I'll just show you all the video. There's one, and there's two.
Вообще козлов, блядь. Ебать.
Hopefully they'll get shot down not too far from where they were in that video. We'll just have to wait until tomorrow to see if we do get any news and pictures of one of them being shot down. Hopefully we will. Moving on down to the area of Donetsk in the town of Makiva, which appears to have kind of become, sorry for the voice crack there, but it kind of appears to be a large suburb of the area of the city of Donetsk. But nonetheless, here we can see that the Russians were firing at something in the sky. It could have been a plane, a drone. We're not really sure, but they were directing ground fire towards it. So I'm going to just let y'all watch this video.
У, сука! Гандоны, блядь. Ну, там беспилотник, наверное, хуярит или что-то, блядь. Ну, не видно. Но они трассерами, они хуй попадают, блядь. У, сука! Так а шо там такое летит? Ну, беспилотник, ебать, им шо, в прикол чисто, блядь, пострелять, вы его хуй собьете, сука. Пидорасы, блядь. Бля, о, бля, вот отсюда. Он с калаша хуярит, ебать, тупо трассерами по беспилотнику. Он что, конченый, ебать, вообще? Ебать, долбоёб. Ну, тупо вот он стоит. Вот, отсюда с машины нахуй. О, видишь? Вот тут стоит второй где-то, блядь.
So we're going to cut this video short because we have one more video of the same event happening from a different perspective. So I'm going to show you all this video real quick. Once again, we can see that the Russians are firing at something in the sky. We're not really sure what it is, but they are shooting at it like their life depends on it. So it's very interesting to me to suggest that the Ukrainians are starting to do some kind of activity over Russian-controlled territory. We know that they've been doing that before. They've sent cruise missiles to, well, I'm not really sure if they were cruise missiles or ballistic missiles, but they sent them to Rostov-on-Don and the 1st Army Armory at Kursk, and blew up the 1st Army Armory almost to completion, and then destroyed 2 aircraft at Rostov-on-Don. So this isn't the first time they've done something like this, but this is the first time we've seen on video the Donetsk Republic being able to fire at whatever it is. Previously, there was a couple of cruise and ballistic missiles that landed in that area, but as far as we know, there wasn't any fire being directed at them while they were en route. So that's actually all the information we have from the Donbass area, and now we're going to move on down to the city of Mariupol, which is kind of in the Donbass, but then again, at the same time, I kind of don't really consider it as in the Donbass. I consider it as being in the actual southern front. And so now we're going to cover the news in Mariupol. Of course, I always have to give the preface that the city of Mariupol is holding out for as long as it can, but we don't know how much longer it'll be able to. They've been cut off from supplies as far as everything is concerned: food, water, ammunition, heating, anything and everything that you can imagine. They've been cut off from it entirely. The citizens who are still stuck in Mariupol are living in almost a literal hell, as well as the soldiers, yet they continue to fight on bravely every day because they know the longer they hold, the more supplies they're going to be eating up that the Russians could be using elsewhere, and the more soldiers they'll also be holding, trying to make sure that they actually take this major city. So, the first bit of news that we've gotten today from this area is that the Azov hit more Russian troops in Mariupol. The Azov battalion, they're calling them a regiment here, but they've been doing an incredibly good job at holding the city, so I'm going to show you all this footage. Apparently, the missile hit somewhere here in what appears to be some trees. Bam. And then we can see that now the Russians are kind of disoriented and confused, and they're starting to run around and try and figure out what to do. Good stuff. It's always good to see that the Ukrainians are still able to hold the ground down there, and that they're giving the Russians hell and not letting them have the city easy. So we're going to move on to the next bit of news, and we can see that the Russians fire into a building. We don't know if there were any civilians inside of this building, but nonetheless, it is somewhat questionable whenever the Russians fire into a building because they probably don't care if there's civilians in there or not. But I'm going to show you all this video. As you can see, there's a tank. It appears to be maybe a T-72B, just a standard T-72B, but I'm not really sure. It could be a B-3. but it doesn't have the anti-javelin cage on it. And we can see that they're looking into this rubble of houses over here, and they're just sitting there. And so I'm assuming that they're trying to figure out if there's anything to fire at in there, and now they did. And so they fired into the kind of like area of houses. Hopefully no civilians were inside of there. As you see, they're now firing into the other high-rises across the rest of the city. That's very unfortunate stuff to see, really.
Ебануться.
Good lord.
Бодя, блядь. Ну ты даешь, нахуй.
Yeah, that's a T-72B. We know that for sure now. So this is like Russia's mediocre stuff. It's not really their good stuff.
Вот это, блядь, Бодя, нахуй.
Бодя ебашит.
Дай Боже, ебать.
8 осталось, да? Или 7? Ну, еще не все, у него 10 осталось конфет. Коробки, 10 конфет в коробке.
Уху.
And you see back there, it appears that this building's already been hit and caught fire, and most of it's already been burned out. And the Russians are going to make sure and ensure that they're able to destroy the rest of the city building by building. We already know that 80 to 90% of the buildings in Mariupol have been destroyed to the point that they're going to have to be rebuilt, and it looks like the Russians are going for the remaining 10 to 20% that is still standing in decent condition.
Какой? 625 говорил? Или 525? Обе.
So I'm going to cut this video a little bit short because it's just the tank kind of moving around, firing at kind of the same stuff, and you all get the picture. It's once again the Russians just shooting at anything that moves. Any twitch of grass that that kind of like sways in the wind will be shot at, and it be damned whether there's civilians by it or not. It's unfortunate stuff, and I hate to see it. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news inside of Mariupol, where we can see that there have been some fires in Mariupol. I'll show you all this. I'm assuming that these may actually be from a different angle of what we were seeing over there, but now we can see that there's fires inside of the Khrushchevkas. Hopefully no civilians are getting burned alive in the process of that, but we know that the Russians don't really care about civilians. They just treat them like animals. That's very unfortunate to see, and I hate looking at this stuff because I know that tomorrow they'll be coming out with videos of burned civilians inside of these buildings. It's terrible, and you know, I mean, like, of course, here's my usual call to action. Everyone knows I'm always doing a call to action to call up your representatives and so on, but people are scared that the world will be annihilated by a nuclear onslaught, and that if we stay out of this war, we're going to be able to kind of sail through this and not get involved. And in my opinion, this is just my opinion, so y'all can take it for what you will as an opinion. I believe that this war is kind of already on its path, and that we're going to have to get involved, whether it be now or a few years in the future. It's pretty much inevitable, it seems, at this point, that we will get involved. Wars usually, like this one, where Putin has already claimed that he wants to claim NATO territories for Russia. We know that that means that it will probably happen in the future, and so we're either going to have to appease the tyrant, or we're going to have to fight him. And we know that we're not going to give up our NATO allies to appease him, because then that means he'll just eventually keep on going until there's nothing left for us to give him, and then he'll just invade anyways. And so a war at this point, in my opinion, is entirely inevitable. So, That being said, knowing and everyone knowing kind of my input on this, what would be the point of sitting around and waiting for Russia to conquer Ukraine for us to then get embroiled in a third world war a year later or 2 years later? It wouldn't really do anything rather than prolong the inevitable. And so, considering that, we have a choice right now, and this is just entirely my opinion. This is I'm kind of trying to explain better to some people what my opinion is, so that way you're not thinking that I'm just asking for the slaughter of American soldiers and Western allies and their soldiers and civilians just to do the right thing. I feel that at this point it's inevitable for us to get drawn into this war. And so what would you rather do? Would you rather wait until we have to go to war and then say that we never stood up for the Ukrainians who had done nothing wrong? Or would you say that we pretty much knew that war was on the horizon at this point, and so we entered this war to do the right thing, and regardless whether we were going to get destroyed or not, we were kind of going to get destroyed in the future anyways if we entered a third world war, and so at least we did the right thing during the time we had. That's kind of my standpoint on it. So hopefully y'all kind of get a better idea of where I'm coming from, instead of just thinking that I'm asking for your whole entire family to get obliterated in a nuclear onslaught, because honestly at this point, I feel like a third world war will just be a matter of time at this point. It's nearly inevitable in my opinion, and there's really no way to back out of that or avoid it. We're already seeing the writings on the wall, and I just want to say, and I also want to say this too to add in some historical context. The writings on the wall, because this is the same thing we did as the United States in World War I and World War II. And we always look back at both of those wars and we go, man, the Americans were so stupid. It was obvious that this war was going to break out into a world war any time, and they were just going to have to get dragged into it. And on top of that, how could they sit by and watch the suffering of all these Jews and Slavs and Poles that were killed by the Germans? And they knew it was happening to a pretty good bit, because I was actually listening to a story from my grandmother, who was alive during the time. A few weeks ago, I was talking to her, and she was alive at the time, and she actually said that they knew very well about how poorly the Germans were treating civilians in occupied Poland well before the United States got involved. But it was looked at like now, oh, are we really going to get involved and get hundreds of thousands of Americans killed just to step in and do the right thing right now? No, I'm not going to have my own people die just for this cause. And so, you know, and look at it like that. We always look back at the older America, 80 years ago, 90 years ago, that was mostly isolationist as far as it came to getting involved in foreign wars. And we look at them and go, how stupid were they to sit there and watch this all happen and not get involved until it directly led to an attack on them? They must have just been dumb and had no foresight. And we're doing the same thing now in a way. And that's kind of like the whole kind of fleshed out standpoint on what I say we should take a more strong stance, like a more militant stance, and giving an ultimatum maybe, and having it backed up with force of arms. Because if a world war is going to be inevitable, we might as well try and deal with it now while the Russians are kind of at their weakest, instead of allowing them time to kind of like rebuild and prepare for what they'll do in the future. It's kind of what I'm looking at it as. So now we're going to move on to the last bit of news in Mariupol, and we're going to see that there were bombs dropped on the metallurgy plant in southeastern Mariupol. So I'm going to show all this footage here. So you can see there was a bomb that fell in there, multiples of them. And you see them actually coming in. This video is in slow motion. But absolutely leveling this factory. It's actually, it's incredibly large if you look at it on Google Maps. This is a sprawling factory complex, and they're just going to completely obliterate it in an attempt to get the Azov battalion rooted out of their defensive positions and maybe across the river inside the city. It's very unfortunate, and I hate that it's happening. That's something that Ukraine will have to rebuild after the war, hopefully build it back better than it was before. So that's all the news we have out of Mariupol today. So we're now going to move on to the rest of the news in the southern front. We haven't heard anything out of Berdyansk or Melitopol, so it suggests that there may have been a little bit of a break in anything interesting happening. Although I don't doubt that the citizens of Melitopol and Berdyansk are still out there protesting and kind of getting in brawls with the Russians because they're so unhappy with being occupied by the Russians. So we're now going to move on to the area of Kherson, where we've seen some interesting stuff today. I'm going to show these two videos. It's somewhat disturbing. The Russians actually fired on the protesters and shot a few of them, but this isn't in this footage. So I'm going to let y'all see this and just let you watch it for yourselves. So anyways, I'm going to cut this video short because we're going to move on to the next angle that we've seen. And this is the second angle in that last video, but this one's more fleshed out in its entirety. So I'm going to show y'all this one here real quick.
Что за хуйня? Ну-ка, блядь. Смотри, что творят, ебать. Снимаем, блядь. Домой! 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 Пиздец! Пизда! Чисто! Пидорасы, блядь! Ёбаный рот! Нормально все? Пиздец.
So I'm going to cut the video short there. It's just another 7 seconds, and they're just walking after that. But we do know that some of the protesters were wounded. We're not sure if any of them have died. We may be able to get some more information on that tomorrow. But it appears that the Russians are no longer going to try and play nice with the protesters in Mariopol, Berdyansk, and Kherson. We've also seen some other videos today, but due to the time constraints on these streams, I wasn't able to show it today. But they are beating protesters as well. So do with that what you will. And, you know, it's pretty much obvious what the Russians are at this point. And so we're now going to move on towards Mykolaiv, where we've had a couple of bits of news today. We can see that there were more abandoned vehicles near Mykolaiv. We can see these here. Very good stuff. A couple of MTLBs that appear to have been captured. We can see that they also captured a ambulance version of the MTLB, I assume, and a Ural 4320, I believe, or 4350. I'm not really sure which one it is right now. I'm kind of having a little bit of a blockage with the number designation of that vehicle, but more vehicles captured, and that's very good. Also, we have some river crossing that was destroyed near Mykolaiv. I'll show you all this right here. Completely destroyed, along with some Russian vehicles as well.
То самое место, где враг попытался навести переправу. Российские войска, да, вот их галеты попытались в этом районе навести переправу. Мост был взорван, и для наступления в Николаевской области им нужно было перейти эту реку. Река небольшая, но, конечно, ни одна колонна, ни один танк здесь не пройдет. Однако переправа была уничтожена точными ударами украинских воинов. Вооруженные силы Украины уничтожили переправу и сорвали.
So I'm going to cut that video short. We can see there that the river crossing was destroyed. It is, of course, great news to know that it was destroyed. And so now we're going to move on to the last bit of news inside of Ukraine, which is near the area of Odessa, and we can see that there were was maybe a naval clash near Odessa, or this was Russian naval units firing onto Ukrainian land units near the sea, but we can see that there was splashes of fire out on the sea. So I'm going to show you all that. You can see the splashes out there. You know, it's got to be really stressful to live in a wartime situation like this. Like, imagine if you're in this coastal town and you were just getting fired at by an unknown ship out at sea. I mean, that would be stressful to think of being under the fear of that every day, and that every day could be your last just because the Russians just are careless and they fire a shell into your house. You know, it's a high explosive shell, it explodes and kills everyone in your family. That must be an incredibly stressful thing to live under every day.
Это они сюда... Или это они сюда стреляют?
So I'm going to cut that video short. As you can see, it was just fire from a ship at sea. Not really sure exactly what was going on there, but, you know, the video pretty much just shows the events that were unfolding. And finally, our last bit of news is that we can see a woman was arrested by the police in a Russian town called Yekaterinburg. I'm going to show you all that right now. It's pretty funny, actually, because the woman actually puts up a very good fight against the cops, but I'm going to show it to y'all.
Ты чё, сука, охуел? Девушку, оставь спокойно, что делаете, это девушку трогаете. Не пинай,
Оставьте девушку!
Значит, оставьте девушку!
That's pretty much the end of it. I was just wanting to show you all the clash. I'm glad to know that there are Russians that do go against this war. We don't know how many there are, but it's just good to know that there are some people in Russia. It appears to be mostly the younger generations that do not support the war. So very glad to see that there's still a group of Russians out there that are vehemently against it. But at this point, a decent amount of them have been arrested or fled the country. So hopefully there's still a decent amount that are left that can hopefully the higher-ups in the government can maybe take advantage of to launch some kind of coup, perhaps. But that's nothing but fanciful thinking at this point, because we're not really sure if anything like that could ever be planned or staged. So that being said, we've actually covered all the news today, and so we're going to go to the questions. And so how many Super Chats do we have, Matthew?
Oh, goodness. We have, I've honestly lost count, but it's definitely over 35.
Ooh. So we're going to put a stop on the Super Chats for tonight. I thank everyone for their donations, but we're going to ask that no one donates any further, especially if you have a question. If you would like to donate or ask a question via Super Chat, make sure to do that tomorrow, first thing, and we'll make sure to get to it as fast as we can, because if y'all do have a question and y'all are giving a Super Chat to get a question answered, I don't want y'all to do that and then I leave you hanging because we're running out of time. So I thank y'all very much again for supporting the channel. It means a lot to us. And so that being said, what do we got, Matthew?
Okay, so first up, we have a $50 donation from Joseph Riley. He says, thank you for your time and effort. And Joseph, we do appreciate the compliment, and we do appreciate the donation as well. Thank you for your support. Next up, we have a $50 donation from John Lee. He asks, what do you think about Putin on your data?
That kind of sounds like a song in a bit, you know, Putin on your data, but could you rephrase that question to me again, because I really couldn't catch what it was saying.
I'm not really sure myself. If I had to interpret it, what do you think about Putin on your data? Like maybe Putin is sort of like doing his own thing? I'm not really sure.
Ah, okay. Well, I think Putin's a little unhinged at this point. He keeps on saying very dangerous rhetoric, very risky rhetoric. And so, to make the answer kind of short, in a way, but I'll explain it a little bit extra, he seems to have lost his mind. The main reason that we can kind of assume that is because he kind of looks bloated, and people are saying that he has some kind of terminal cancer, which can be supported in a way because we know that he did get surgery some time ago for some kind of ulcer, or, well, not really ulcer, it was some kind of cancer in his colon. He did get surgery for that, so maybe he's terminally ill, and so he's starting to act very odd, or maybe the illness is starting to impair his judgment, so he's starting to act very hostile and aggressive. But I think that he's lost his mind, to kind of give like a bit of an opinion on my medical assessment of him. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope I answered that question pretty well. There's really not much to go into there, rather than he seems to be crazy. So I hope I answered that question good enough, and if I did, make sure to reach out to me on Discord and tell me that you're from the live stream and that you asked that question in chat, and I'll try and get you a better answer, maybe hop on a call if I can. But I thank you very much nonetheless, and so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and as the viewers know by now, we do have some channel regulars, and it wouldn't be a complete night without a comment from Knuckles with a $20 donation. He says, why can't Russia fly in food, fuel, and other logistics stuff? If road is not working, why not try something else? Did you hear about the boats full of grain being stolen by the Russians? Also set up a Cash App. YouTube takes 30%.
YouTube does take 30%, but I'm generally okay with it because, like, at least people are getting something out of it, like they can ask a question. And it also, on top of helping us support the channel, which is critically important, it also helps us to get a good question pool, because about every night we get around 12,000 questions, so it's, 12,000 chats. So it's very hard to try and keep track of that and find the good answers in it, because there's just so many of them. But to answer your question, the reason why they aren't flying in grains is because not flying in grains, flying in food or supplies, is because it's incredibly risky. The transport aircraft could easily be shot down, and considering that the airspace is still contested over Ukraine, it would just be an incredibly dangerous move, and it'd be putting air assets at risk without really any necessity to do that. And so I think that's the main reason. Also, they don't really control any suitable airports rather than the Hostomel airport, which is right on the front lines at this point. And so there really is nowhere for them to go and land to supply the troops anyways, rather than probably some of the airports in Donetsk and Luhansk. But then again, that's also questionable as well. So thank you once again, Knuckles. You've been a repeated supporter. Also, I have not heard about the Russians commandeering the grain ships. I have not heard about that. So if you could maybe send me a link after the stream, I'll try and take a look at it. So I thank you very much once again for the support, and I hope I answered that question pretty well. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, I just want to say to begin with that I saw a few comments wondering if maybe we had skipped a few super chats. It isn't that we have skipped any, it's just we have quite a backlog, so we will get to them before we end the stream tonight. It just may take a moment. So the next one up is from David Gibbons. He puts in a donation of $20. David, we appreciate your support very much. And the next question we have is from Matthew Forbes. He puts in a donation of $10. And he says, I love this channel very much. Thanks so much for running it. Any chance Ukraine can launch a strategic pincer op? Cut off the Kiev column, for example? Or does that require too many resources?
There's the chance that they could do that, but I don't really know exactly enough about their supply or force strength to actually say whether that be possible or not. And if you're talking about the 40-mile long convoy, and that's what you're calling the Russian column, that one actually has pretty much fallen apart. The remaining 17 miles of it stayed on the roadway for quite a while and then disappeared, but the forward parts of the convoy actually apparently spread out amongst the tree lines. And while I've heard some people say that this is the Russians planning to use them in the offensive later on, that convoy was made up of mostly softer vehicles like trucks and such, and so what that suggests to me is that they've tried to move them into the tree line to obscure them from vision and keep them off the road, so that way maybe they don't have to draw so much supplies trying to run air support missions, air cover missions to make sure the convoy stays safe, and they can maybe stop putting such a strain on trying to protect it. So if you're asking about that convoy in particular, it's already kind of dissolved. But a pincer maneuver, I'm not entirely sure if it'd be possible, but then again, the Ukrainians have nothing but surprises up their sleeves in terms of what they've been able to achieve, and so who knows, maybe they could, maybe they couldn't, but right now I don't really have enough information to go either way. But I thank you very much once again for the super chat. It helps us out a lot here at the channel, and I thank you very much for the question. It was a pretty good one. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from Nathan Burrows. He says, greatness of good shall always triumph over evil. Love defeats the demon. Peace, love, unity, solidarity. Slava Ukraine, and thank you, Enforcer.
Slava Ukraina, and thank you very much for the support. I'm glad to hear that a lot of people like the channel. I'm glad that so many people agree in a way that kind of like getting a little bit more aggressive in our stance towards Russia here in the West may be a beneficial thing. I think that may be what you were trying to say there, perhaps. But I thank you very much once again for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from longtime channel supporter Anthony K. Smith. He says, I have an online friend near Donetsk. DPR police are going house to house forcing males to join DPR army. If they refuse or try to leave Donetsk, they are being shot as deserters.
Wow. Well, if that's true, I mean, like, it probably is, considering it's coming from your friend. That's wild. That's kind of like what happened here in the Civil War in the South. There was a group called the Bushwhackers, and they would go around the South, pretty much rounding up all the males that were around for military service, and they would also commandeer and steal a whole bunch of stuff like horses, food, and so on. But yeah, that sounds a lot like that. That sounds like the modern version of a bushwhacker, which is kind of concerning and scary, considering that the people in Donetsk really have no safety from it, considering that that is pretty much their government. So that's very interesting, and thank you very much for sharing that with us, because that's incredibly interesting to hear. So I thank you very much for the support, and also letting us know that, because that's a pretty interesting piece of information. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and the next question we have tonight is from D.D. Lachuga. They say, Russia is losing so many people, they are going to start drafting young cannon fodder. What do you think?
I've heard something about that. I think that they won't for now, because, you know, the Russian army is around 730,000 large, and while 15,000 is a big number, I don't think it's enough to actually start calling in like a draft of a sort, or like required conscription, although they kind of have that already. I don't really think they're to that point, but if they decided that they are, and they are actually carrying through on that, that's going to be something really interesting to see, because that's going to start demoralizing probably a lot of people in Russia, because I don't believe they've done anything like that since Afghanistan in the 70s and 80s. So that's going to come as a shock to them, and probably start drawing public opinion away from the war, or maybe bolstering it even further. It just depends on how the Russians would go about that situation. But nonetheless, very interesting idea and a topic to talk about. So maybe we could get some people conversating about that in the chat and what they think about it. And so I thank you very much for the support and the question. And so we're going to move on to the next one.
And the next question is from Xian Wu with a donation of $10. They say, have you heard of reports saying that Russia is pulling troops and equipment from the Far East? It doesn't seem wise to leave their eastern frontier increasingly undefended. Beers on me.
Thank you very much for the beer fund. I don't think that the Russians will be in any sort of perilous danger moving units from the eastern areas of their country, because the Chinese aren't going to try and invade them, because, one, while the Chinese and the Russians are on friendlier terms than Russia is with the rest of the world, Russia still has nukes, and they'd be very willing to wave those in front of the Chinese and threaten to obliterate them if they tried anything. And then the Chinese, in turn, also have nuclear weapons at this point, and so it would be a nuclear standoff, kind of like how the West is undergoing. The Chinese really also, if that's kind of like the direction you're going at, the Chinese also have no reason to really conquer this land, because they don't have to spend any administrative costs on this area of Russia that they would have to control if they conquered it. And on top of that, they can just import the raw materials already. And I think I covered that last night and said it was probably a very smart move of them to get the Russians on their own with no trade partners, because now all the materials that are produced in Russia that for export are going to be dirt cheap, and the Chinese can take advantage of it to get decent quality materials at an incredibly discounted price, most likely. So I thank you very much for the support. I don't really think that's too big of a failing on Russia's part because the eastern area of the country is strategically worthless to a point. It's really just a bunch of nothing. It's material rich, yes, but strategically, it's just a giant, vast area of nothingness. So thank you very much for the support, and I hope I answered that question pretty well. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next one.
All right, and our next question is from Jug Shammy with a donation of $20. They say, I've only been able to find 2 channels that give unbiased info, you and Funker 530. Do you trust any other channels that we, your audience, should use to get unbiased info?
Well, I would give shout outs to other channels, but the thing is that I really don't watch any other channels. I try and keep my information as unbiased and as original as possible based off of the knowledge I know. And so watching other people's channels would, of course, rub off on me, and then I might start repeating and parroting things that they're saying. And I don't really want to do that because then that kind of devolves this channel into being a run-of-the-mill kind of thing, and I want the information to be authentic and new to a degree, and founded in fact and basic principles to a point. So I can't actually recommend any others because I don't really watch any others. I'm sorry that that may come as a shock to a lot of people, but running this channel does take a lot of time, and I have very little time to actually watch other videos most of the time. I hardly have time to take a break. Like, if you're on my Discord and you see that it says I'm playing, like, War Thunder, because that's a game I love to play, I'm actually usually just having that turned on in the background, played it for 5 minutes, and now I'm working on something else, so I have, like, almost no time at all. But I thank you nonetheless for the question. Unfortunately, I can't really answer it because I don't watch other YouTube channels. But that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from Dumma Loop for a donation of $50. They say, just wanted to show my appreciation for what you're doing and keep it up, fellas.
Thank you very much for the support. I'm glad that you like the channel and what we're doing. It's always a good thing to know that there's loads of support and, once again, a lot of help for us running the channel. And so I thank you very much, and I hope that you have enjoyed the stream enough to maybe join our Discord and also give it a like and a subscribe. The subscriber amount, like, that's like, if you like the content, this comes on 10 p.m. Eastern time every day, like every single day. I have never missed a day yet. So if you just want to see this news again and you like it a lot, make sure to subscribe and also hit the bell, so that way you'll be notified when this thing comes on tomorrow. It's the same time every day. But also like it because it helps us out in the algorithms a lot, and it helps it get out to a lot more people. So if you think this news is quality and more people should be hearing it, make sure to give it a like, because that'll actually make that become a reality if enough people do it. But I thank you very much once again for the support. It means a lot to me. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, I just want to give a quick shout out to Be Led Better with a $10 donation. Thank you very much for your support. Next question is from Brant Sturgill. He puts in a $10 donation and says, does Ukraine have any cruise missiles, and when are they going to target the Kremlin and Putin's house?
They do have cruise missiles from what I know, but they have a limited amount of them, and I'm not really sure if they would like to try and shoot those cruise missiles toward Moscow, because I guarantee you that the city of Moscow is probably heavily protected by an air defense ring, kind of like they were during the Cold War. We know that they actually have some kind of nuclear defense ring around the city. I'm not really sure exactly how that works, but both the United States and Russia were both granted under a treaty to create some kind of nuclear defensive ring around their capital cities. While the United States didn't do it, the Russians did. So I think that they would probably also expand into missile defense systems around their capital. And so I'm not really sure if the Ukrainians would like to risk losing valuable missiles in maybe a futile attempt to attack the Russians. But who knows? I mean, like, we do know that they have cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, so maybe in the future, if they have the range, they might try and, touch the Kremlin. So I thank you very much for the support, and that's actually a pretty good question that I may have to look into and try and figure out in depth if that would be a possibility for the Ukrainians. And so that being said, thank you very much for the support once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
The next question is from Ryan Shipovich. He puts in a donation of $10, and he says, please consider next week donations going to Ukrainian Army. National Bank of Ukraine has opened a direct account for armed forces, easy to donate through bank's website and vetted by many organizations.
Yes, I actually did look into that, but the problem is that that's not that can't be set up through YouTube. and you know, the donations have to be run through YouTube because that's the only way I can feasibly do them, because YouTube takes care of all of the costs, and also they do all of the accounting for the figures. And so sadly they don't actually have that as an EIN number under GuideStar for me to use, so I couldn't sadly start a fundraiser that goes directly to the Ukrainian army. And that's why I've been doing humanitarian organizations so far, because I've been able to find those and they are active in Ukraine. And so, you know, any help is better than no help, I guess. And so that's kind of been my approach to helping out the organizations we've helped out so far, because at least we're helping out civilians in a way. But I thank you very much for the suggestion. We have already looked into that, sadly. And that being said, thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and just a heads up, Enforcer, we're sitting currently at about 29 more super chats, and also, as I said earlier, a few more other questions as well. So the next question up is from Nick C. He puts in a donation of $10. He says, another reason Russia is struggling, there are hardly any NCOs to make sure orders are executed. The Russian army is mostly officers and lower enlisted, and there are only 3 grades of sergeant, hence the lack of discipline.
I do have to agree with that. That's actually something that's very well documented in the Russian army. Another reason why it's kind of backwards is that they have so many officers that the officers kind of take up the roles that the NCOs do in the U.S. military. So that's something that they always have to kind of be on the lookout for, and also that leads to very inexperienced people being put in the position of an NCO, because everyone in the U.S. military knows how incompetent, like, officers are when they come right into the service. You know, second lieutenants can't read maps. That's always been a joke. And so you can assume, considering that all those people make up pretty much the sergeant level positions in the Russian army, you can probably get an idea of how bad off they really are in terms of actually conducting a war with that kind of situation in the background. So I can agree with that entirely. Thank you very much for the statement. It's entirely true. I can back that up. It's pretty much a fact. And so I thank you very much for the support. And that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And moving on to the next question, we have a $20 donation from Gandalf TW. He says, I agree with your assessment. I believe the USA will need to get involved sooner or later. Those who do not remember history are doomed to repeat it. And thank you very much, and keep up your good work.
Thank you very much for the support. And just to answer that whole entire question in a nutshell, the most important thing to learn from history is that nobody learns from history. And so I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question tonight is from, once again, from Anthony K. Smith with another donation of $10. He says, the lack of activity around Sumy, etc., may mean repositioning and supplying of forces to nearby Belarus. If the Belarusians won't invade Ukraine, northwest through Belarus, the Russians certainly will.
I can see that as probably being a thing in the future, but considering that their logistics are so bogged down currently trying to conduct all the offensives they have over here, I think that an offensive in the northwest is currently being put on hold. And on top of that, I think that they probably want to get a stronger sorry, I'm turning into Elmer Fudd, a stronger grip on the eastern side of the country before they actually try and conduct an offensive on the northwestern side of the country. At least that's how I'm looking at it, but I may be wrong. They may be trying to conduct that soon if the Belarusians won't. So I thank you very much for the support. It always helps us out at the channel a lot, and I hope I answered that question pretty well. It's kind of a short rundown, but that's kind of like the general stance that I'm seeing on this. And once again, it's entirely my opinion, and no one's bound to my opinion. It's not a fact or anything you have to keep once you hear it. It's just what I'm thinking on the situation at the moment. But thank you once again, nonetheless, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a question from Sans Pure 91. He says, how long until this aggression emboldens China to take Taiwan, which would usher in World War III?
I think that this kind of aggression that's happening on Russia's part has actually made China much more apprehensive about doing what they want in Taiwan, because the Chinese economy is much more reliant on foreign trade than the Russians were. And now the Russians, you know, of course, every country is relying on foreign trade to a point, but the Chinese, and the only way they grow their economy is mostly through exporting their domestically produced goods to foreign countries like the United States and the European Union as a whole, not to list every single country in Europe. So if they were to try and invade Taiwan, and the U.S. stance and the EU stance was the same as they are doing to the Russians right now, the Chinese would actually go from making about $500 billion a year in trade, which is close to, like actually it is exactly $500 billion in economic growth a year. They would then immediately go to a trade deficit of around negative $80 billion. So their economy would kind of be shrinking by $80 billion a year to just keep up the foreign trade that they have with all the other countries around the world. There's really no way that they can get around that either, because the trade deficit that they'd be enduring under such sanctions would be so large, there just are no other suitable trade partners around the world that they could find to make up for that loss. So I think that they're actually weighing their situation much more carefully now than they probably were at the start. Also considering that they refused military aid to Russia, and they have also very lightly sanctioned them themselves to just try and keep in favor with their trading partners to a point. So that's kind of my opinion on what China's doing. I don't really think that Taiwan will be invaded anytime soon, considering what's going on in Ukraine and the response to that. And so the Chinese are going to be very careful about the next moves they make. So I hope that answers the question. I hope you got something out of that, at least as far as my opinion, because I think the Chinese weigh their economic decisions far greater than their actual strategic decisions or their cultural decisions. But that's just me. So thank you very much once again for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a question from Sean Moran. He says, what would a full cyber war between NATO and Russia be like? Would it actually happen? The best cyber attack is one that doesn't look like an attack, and I know China wants to know both sides' capabilities.
I'm not really I'm not exactly a qualified person in any way, because I really don't know a lot about internet infrastructure to talk about what a cyber attack would look like. All I can really tell you is that if a cyber attack did happen and it was a full-scale one, my stream probably wouldn't come on that night because it wouldn't be able to. And beyond that, that's really all I can say about it, because I really honestly don't know a lot about internet infrastructure and how cyber attacks would actually work. So far, we saw that when Russia conducted cyber attacks on Ukraine, they were mostly just on government websites to scare the public. So I don't really know if that would be the extent of their cyber warfare, and if that's being overhyped as well, much like the rest of their military has been. But we do know that if the United States was to conduct cyber attacks on anywhere around the world, and considering that the United States is kind of like the leading edge nation right now in terms of cyber technology, we could assume that their capabilities would be much greater than the Russians, and so they would be able to inflict more damage on the Russians in a cyber attack, most likely, just due to budgeting reasons and also the level of technology and kind of like domestic production and knowledge we have available. But I thank you very much for the question. I hope I answered it pretty well. And that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a donation of $10 from Jay Strickland. He says, what is the likelihood of a coup or a successful revolt in Belarus?
I'm not entirely sure. No one really talks about Belarus, and I don't really know a lot about any kind of civil unrest occurring in Belarus. And I don't think there really is any, because all the unrest we're seeing is actually inside of the army, as generals and head officials are just resigning or just refusing to follow orders, from what we can tell. And so I think that nothing's really going to happen in Belarus, because their hands are already tied, because their military just refuses to do anything as far as we can tell. But then again, that's just what we've been hearing. You know, that may be propaganda in a way, because while most of the time I believe everything that the Western side says, of course there are things sometimes that are just said to get a good laugh out of us, be like, yeah, look at that, you know, things are going our way. So I'm not entirely sure if that's still the case. So I really can't give a good answer, because there's just not enough information coming out of Belarus to get an idea if there would be a coup. And if there would be, the Russians would probably just roll in, quash it, and make sure that the government in charge stays in charge. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope I answered that question pretty well. And that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another question from Knuckles. He puts in another $10 donation, and he says, why would the Ukraine military use the mall they got bombed to store military vehicles and other equipment? It's a civilian building, and it feels like an unnecessary danger for the civilians. Keep up the good work.
As far as we could actually tell in that video, they were not using the mall. It appeared to be kind of like two bits of footage kind of spliced together, because the MLRSs in the video were operating around an entirely different building, and then in the next bit of footage we saw the mall that got hit, and then they blew up a missile in the front parking lot, and all that was there was civilian vehicles. So I don't really think that that airstrike was actually being conducted on the MLRSs. I think it just hit the mall for no other reason rather than to hit the mall. But I may be entirely wrong on that and on that assessment. Maybe the view of the MLRSs was from another side of the mall, but then at the same time, if it was, why didn't the missile land there? But nonetheless, I thank you very much for your support and the question. So that being said, we're going to move on to the next one.
Okay, and the next question is from Z-Light GP with a donation of $10. They say, interesting how disease and war coincide. 100 years ago to this date, the Soviet Union came to power right after the Spanish flu killed more than 50 million people.
Yeah, it is interesting. I just think that the world kind of goes through a cycle with major diseases, because you usually have some kind of epidemic or outbreak about every 100 years or so. It seems it almost operates like clockwork. Whether it's the same thing, it's never the same thing. It's always something different. But nonetheless, very interesting that sometimes history repeats itself in a way that wasn't intentional, but nonetheless, conflicts arise right around the exact same time that they did about 100 years ago, with the same circumstances kind of like extenuating around it. But I thank you very much for the support and also the comment. It's a very interesting thing to delve into and look at. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and next up we have a question from Jeremy Herbert. He says, does the weather have a big impact on strategic advantage to one side or the other? For example, do cloudy days hamper satellite surveillance? If so, which condition favors the Ukrainians?
Cloud cover always will favor the Ukrainians, because while they are contesting the air superiority, the Russians, of course, do have more air assets, and so it's very hard for the Ukrainians to kind of counter that. Cloud cover also helps out in terms of satellite footage not being able to be picked up. Cloud cover stops satellites most of the time, although this isn't always the case, that are just taking pictures. It stops them from pretty much doing that entirely because they cannot see the ground, and so they have to wait for the satellite to make multiple orbits until it's finally back over the country and the cloud cover's gone, and then they can finally take pictures, but then that's like hours or days worth of information that couldn't be gathered. Also, another thing is that the weather just doesn't affect the satellites and surveillance. It also affects the ground units as well, because if there's a large amount of rain or snow, it can create Rasputitsa, which is heavily against the favor of the Russians, whose armored vehicles would usually get bogged down in that mud, and they'll have to keep them confined to the major roadways that are paved, and then when they do that, they're pretty much easy pickings. So, yes, the weather does have a major bit to do with the war and how it's fought, and most importantly, it has a very big deal towards the Ukrainians' advantage if it's bad weather, like, cloud cover, rain, snow, or anything like that. It's always in the advantage of a defender to usually have poor weather. So that being said, I thank you very much for the question and the support. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question up tonight is from Rodrigo da Silva. They say, this is the best channel covering the war. I wish nothing but peace and prosperity for these brothers in Ukraine. Shout out to you all from Brazil.
Thank you very much for the shout out from Brazil. I actually do have a friend in Brazil, and it sounds like an interesting place. Maybe one day I'll go down there if this channel continues on making new content. Maybe we'll cover a topic in Brazil. Who knows? But I thank you very much for the support, and I'm very glad that you enjoy the news on this channel. A lot of people do. Sometimes we do get a little bit of backlash for the things that are said on here, and there's a lot of Russian bots that also come in here and want to just like go off. But I thank you very much for the support nonetheless. It helps us out a lot. And so with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next donation is from Mark Bohychuk. He leaves a $5 donation, and he says coffee money for the night. And then right after Mark's donation, the dude, he also donated $5, and he said more coffee for the night.
Golly, I'm now going to go to sleep, y'all. Thank you so much for the coffee fund once more. I love the whole coffee fund thing y'all do, because it's just a nice reoccurring little joke in a way. And so I love it. I thank y'all all so much for your support, and I thank you so much, Bohychuk, because you've literally supported us every single night. And so that means a lot, and I'm glad that you enjoy the content enough to continue supporting us. And so thank you once again. It means a lot to me, Bohychuk. So that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
So the next question is from Timothy Janata. He says, "Love your stream, and my question is, what is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?" Actually, just kidding. Carry on.
Well, funnily enough, I was actually driving over a bridge today in town doing some errands, and I actually saw someone who looked like that. I'm just playing. I was gonna say it looked like the wizard from that movie, but not really. I'm just kidding around. There's not a lot of homeless people where I'm at in a way, so. Yeah, thank you very much once again for the support, and I do get the Monty Python reference. Unfortunately, I don't have anything to add to it really of value, but thank you nonetheless. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next donation is from Takata Store with a $5 donation. They say, Matthew does an awesome job. One beer or coffee on me. I hope he stays with us a while. Y'all carry on the great show we like. Takata, thank you very much for the compliment. That really made my night. I appreciate the support, and I know Enforcer also appreciates your continued support as well. And just thank you for being a viewer on the channel. And next up, we have a $5 donation from Mark Bohychuk. Once again, he says, apparently Russian MOD reports 180 UA Bayraktars were shot down. Also about 2 times as many as the UA even owned. Any news on that?
I don't actually have that, but when Matthew said the Russians said that 108 had been shot down, I was like, oh, come on, they don't even have that many. Like, they buy them in like pairs or trios from Turkey. It's not like they just have loads of these things flying around. So I think that's entirely propaganda. The Russians skew the numbers a lot, but then again, the Ukrainians kind of do too in a way, because the casualty statistics are a little optimistic in a way, but I kind of dismiss that a bit because no one really knows the exact numbers, and really it's anyone's guess as to how much equipment or vehicles has been destroyed. But considering that the Ukrainians don't even own that many of them, it's got to be a mistruth. It's got to be just pure propaganda and a farce. So I thank you very much for the support, and that's kind of my thought on it. And so with that being said, how many super chats do we have left?
See, it looks like we have about 20 left.
Goodness, do people keep on like giving super chats?
No, it looks like for the most part they've gone down pretty good. This is pretty much a backlog right now.
Oh wow. All right. Well, that being said, on to the next question.
So the next question is from Jay Rillo with a $5 donation. They say, do you ever reference the Asian media sources for info? For example, multiple Indian news outlets agree Ukraine is pushing back, but that Russia is still winning nonetheless.
I actually don't, because I usually just go to... well, I don't really want to say that because I'll be kind of unveiling some of my trade secrets, although they may be obvious, but I don't actually check those out a lot. So that's kind of my answer to that. And I don't really know what to say about that, because the Ukrainians are pushing them back, and they've been holding them, and the Russians only control 7% of Ukrainian territory almost a month into the war. I would have to say that they're doing something, and at least holding them, which is considered winning in a defensive war. So I don't really know about that, but I don't really check out that news nonetheless anyways. But I thank you very much for the support and the question, and with that being said, we're going to move on to the next one.
And up next tonight is the question from Elite GP. They say, is it true that 2 Russian jets went into Polish airspace and the United Kingdom closed airspace over Poland? Thanks for the daily stream.
I haven't really heard anything about that, so I'm going to have to plead ignorance on that one, because I don't really hear a lot of news outside of the war happening inside of Ukraine. Maybe there's some stuff domestically inside of Russia, or some really big news that comes from the United States or NATO, the allies in NATO. But I haven't actually heard about that, so I really can't comment on it. But I thank you very much for the support nonetheless, and I'll maybe try and get an answer to that if I do have the time to look into it. But I thank you very much, and that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question tonight is from 66 Ross. They say, about a week ago, General Hodges predicted that the Russians would run out of ammo and supplies. Is there any indication that he was correct?
I would consider that the lack of video evidence and footage to show that there's any fighting in Chernihiv, Sumy, or Kharkiv on an actual gunfighting street-to-street level would suggest that there may be a lack of ammunition and supplies for the normal ground units, and now they're just diverting most of their supply efforts to their artillery. That may be suggesting something like that, because We have not heard anything out of those three cities for quite a while since we suggested that they would fall apart about that time. Then we stopped getting news about ongoing fighting in those three cities. So I believe that that may be proof to show it, but at the same time, they're not going to run entirely out of supplies to the point that they can't continue on a war at all. You know, there will be supplies getting through somewhere to some units, and apparently they're focusing a lot of those supplies in the area of Kyiv and the southern areas around Mariupol and Mykolaiv, as far as I can tell. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope I answered that question pretty well. And that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And I just want to quickly recognize a couple of donations without comments. Gabriel Hernandez, excuse me, and also Don Cross leave $5 donations. We thank you very much for your support, and thank you for being a viewer on the channel. Next up, we have a question from Last the Dude with a $5 donation. He says, "Well, I guess you can be a stone."
that must have been well, I just butchered all that. That must have been made way earlier in the like stream, because that was a long time ago. But yeah, I guess I'll be a stone. Thank you very much for the super chat and the support. It always helps us out a lot. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a question from Germinator. I believe it said Germinator, probably. They say, do you think Russia death/casualty numbers posted on Russian tabloid were real or a cyber attack post? Numbers said 9,800 killed and 16,000 wounded.
I'm not entirely sure about that, because I actually haven't heard about the Russian tabloid posting anything. But if that is the case, that may be true. But then again, you know, tabloids do just say whatever they want to just get people to buy their books and read them, their magazines and read them. So I'm not entirely sure. And I also have to plead ignorance because I didn't actually know about the tabloid. So I'm sorry about that, but I hope I answered that question pretty well. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up is a question from Audra T, who says, Enforcer should check out a Ukrainian National Guardsman YouTube channel called Operator Starsky. He posts updates in English and will answer your questions.
Oh, that's pretty neat. I might take a look into him if I have the time. Once again, I don't watch a lot of other people's channels because it takes a lot to run this one, and I still have stuff to do throughout the day. I'm once again back in college, so there's a decent amount of time that'll be taken up doing that. But I will try and take a look at it. So I thank you very much once again for the support and also the recommendation. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Sean Boy. He says, do you think when Ukraine wins, will it stay a dictatorship or become a democratic country again?
When Ukraine wins?
Yes.
It's already a democratic country. While there's a decent amount of corruption, like anyone would be kind of naive to say there was no corruption in Ukraine and it was a perfect country. Before the war broke out, there was a decent talk about the corruption and the rise of Ukrainian oligarchs in the country, but they're not undemocratic, you see, because the guy that came before Zelensky, his name was Poroshenko, and he was so corrupt in a way that he actually tried to rig the elections in Ukraine, and somehow he still lost miserably. So that tells you that it's not really a dictatorship per se, or else Poroshenko would have still been in charge. And Zelensky says that he's only going to serve one term. So I don't really know where that comment is coming from or based off of, because that's not really the case inside of Ukraine right now. So I thank you very much for the support. And the question was rather interesting. And so we're going to move on to the next one.
And the next question is from Anthony K. Smith once again. He says, not clear who destroyed dam north of Kiev. Google search, Washington Post, Ukraine intentional flooding occurred between 22nd and 28th of February.
Interesting. I didn't get information about that though until now. But I mean, like, then again, that article may have been written a long time ago, but that never showed up on anyone's radar until like a few days ago for me. So if that's the case, that's interesting. And I don't really know how the Russians would be getting around that problem. Maybe this bridge is a rather long bridge or something, I don't know. But very interesting nonetheless. Thank you very much for the information and the support as well. And that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, I'm going to take a moment to recognize two donations without comments. Ryan Shipovich, again, with a $5 donation, and also BSG Wolf with a $5 donation, and James Job with a $2 donation. Thank you very much for your support. And let me get back to the other questions. So our next question is from Gavin Summers. He says, if Ukrainians start winning, they should take Russia by the sack and take Moscow for the war reparations.
Oh, that's pretty ambitious. I mean, like, I believe that the Ukrainians can probably hold their own and win this war in some kind of peace agreement, but an offensive into Russia, now that would be pretty tough. I'm not saying it's entirely impossible, but I would say that's pretty unlikely. But I do see the sentiments where you're coming from, and so I can kind of agree with them on that respect. So I thank you very much for the support, and I thank you very much for the statement. It's an interesting one, and it's an entertaining one nonetheless. So I thank you very much, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And Mark Bohachuk is back at it again with a $5 donation. He says, any word on those Wonder Boys, aka the Syrian army?
The Wonder Boys have gone missing. I don't really know what's happened to them, but it appears that they may have just been a little propaganda thing for the Russians to say, because we have not seen them anywhere. We have not seen footage of them fighting in Ukraine. We haven't seen any footage of them after what was shown. So I don't know what's happened to the Wonder Boys. I guess you could call them the Fantastic Five or whatever they have in Homelander or whatever, the Boys or whatever that show's called. But they've gone missing. So I thank you very much for the support and the question. We don't have anything on them right now. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Jenna Luck. They say, thank you for the coverage. I probably soon have to get in there to get out a friend's relatives. Any advice on how to get in? Route, car from Germany and back.
I don't really have any advice on how to get in because I don't really know how the border guards are operating the borders at the moment. That information is kind of a little too detailed for me to get into and try and read on daily, but I think it'd be rather easy because a lot of people have been managing to get into Ukraine and out of Ukraine, although I don't really know how long it's been taking them to do that. And also today, I believe, Zelensky dropped all the requirements for vehicles coming into Ukraine. There's like no customs or papers required. You can pretty much just drive through at this point, I believe. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that answers your question. And hopefully that's right. Hopefully I wasn't getting any wrong information because I believe Zelensky said that himself in a presidential address. But nonetheless, we're going to move on to the next question. And thank you once again for the support.
And the next question is from Geoff L with a $5 donation. He says, that being said, on to the next question. And with that being said, on to the next question. The next question is from Rainer with a $5 donation. He says, my point is wrong president leading the country for us to go to war right now. And to your point of World War II, there was no nukes when we joined the war.
Yes, but at the same time, there was human suffering and death in World War II, which was good enough of a deterrent, considering that everyone still had the horrors of World War II to think about that only happened about 20 years prior. So that was the thing. And also, I don't really get into politics on this channel, so I don't really talk about whether politicians in charge or not, or right for the job or not. They are there, and that's just the thing we have to deal with. Whoever's in charge is just in charge right now, and they're calling the shots in a way. So I don't really weigh in on that because there's no point to. It's kind of futile. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Mr. Phil 360. He says, could that be anti-mine tactic, or someone forgot to carry the one with distance calculations?
Do you know what that's in reference to?
He must have been referencing a video you were showing earlier, referencing some anti-mine tactics, and he was wanting to know, I'm not really sure what to make of it, but he's probably referencing a video from earlier.
Oh man, I'm sorry, man, but I don't know what video you're specifically talking about. But if you could probably get back, like circle back tomorrow maybe, or let me know over Discord what video you were talking about exactly, maybe I can answer it then, because right now I'm at a complete loss as to what that would have been on. But I thank you nonetheless for the support, and I'm sorry I can't answer the question. Make sure everyone make sure that if you're like here now and you're thinking about putting in the super chat and you're wanting to like directly reference a video, please make sure to kind of include a little bit of a description about what the video was about if you can. so that way I can make sure to try and jog my memory and think of which video it is. So once again, I thank you very much for the support, and I'm sorry I couldn't really get you an answer to that question. So that being said, we're going to move on to the next one.
Next question is from EthanTube98. He says, I just wanted to support the channel more and tell everyone that donated yesterday that we helped Ukraine so much with that 27,000. Good work, everyone. And also, Ethan, we actually ended up raising, I believe, over $30,000.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. $30,500. We raised more the last time by about $1,500 than we did for the Red Cross. So I consider that a huge achievement. We've cumulatively raised $60,000 to help out nonprofits in Ukraine. So I consider that a huge success and a great achievement. And I thank my whole entire community for it because it wouldn't be possible without you guys. And I gotta say, y'all are some of the nicest, kindest people on earth. And so thank you very much once again for the support. And that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and we're making pretty good progress here. We have about 10 super chat questions left. The next one is from Ryan9000. He says, have you seen the death numbers confirmed by the Kremlin today? Almost 10,000 officially said to the Russian people.
I did not actually see that. I haven't actually heard any reports of that. I usually focus mostly on frontline news in Ukraine, and then the picture outside of Ukraine kind of just comes together if it does, but usually I try and cover all the information we've gotten in Ukraine, which usually takes up a lot of time. And so due to time constraints, I actually didn't see that today, if that is true. And so I'm going to check that out after the stream and see if that is true, because if so, then that means that the Russians probably have taken more casualties than that, and the Ukrainian numbers around 15,000 are probably true at this point, if that's to be believed. So I thank you very much once again for the support, and we will look into that to see if that validifies the Ukrainian claims in terms of casualties. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Call of the Wild Outdoors. They leave a $5 donation. And unfortunately, I cannot read the comment just out of respect for our other viewers. But I assure you that we will be monitoring the chat to make sure that nobody is harassing anybody. But thank you for your donation. So next up is a question from DeView Smile. They say, I think the West do not want to come and get involved because they prefer for Ukraine to become like Afghanistan, draining resources from Russia.
That may be true. I may have to agree with that, because we once again have to consider that there's a lot of factors at play as to why the West does the things it does, and it may be to just make Ukraine kind of like a sink where they eat up Russia's resources for a long amount of time. So we never know. That may actually be the case. So thank you very much for the support and also the comment, because that's an interesting way of looking at it. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Sea Dog Pirate. They say, do you think the Russian army really only marches on paper, and the Fulda Gap steamroller was only propaganda?
I think the Fulda Gap steamroller was nothing more than propaganda, and I think that the Russian forces are in a terrible state compared to what's been advertised. Of course, the country has nothing but praise for their own military, and they hype it up a lot. Same for the U.S., but we actually have a budget to back it up. So I think, honestly, that the Russians have been hyping up their military the entire time because they have no budget to be able to support the number of forces that they have. And if they're somehow able to support their entire military on that small budget, that would be incredibly shocking. Apparently, they'd be employing a lot of slave labor to make up for the costs of it. At least that's the only way I could explain it, which is pretty much me saying that the idea that the Russians can actually field the entire military they have on paper is kind of outlandish. But thank you very much for the support nonetheless. It's a very good comment and a question in a way. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And we are now down to about 8 super chats. The next one is from BSG Wolf. He says, how far will an amphibious landing be to Odessa, as I can't believe Russia would be that stupid to assault it directly?
I believe that a naval invasion around Odessa would most likely happen probably much further down the coast towards Serhivka, but then again, it looks like there's a barrier island here, which would make that an unsuitable landing location. So I think the next best thing for them would be Koblev, I believe, or somewhere around Rybakivka, because then you're not entering this little gulf here, which may also pose some problems themselves. So I think this right here, this Koblivi to Rybakivka, would probably be the best place for a landing force to operate. But then again, that's entirely my opinion. It's just kind of based on my limited military knowledge and how tactics actually are conducted. So we just have to see in the coming days if a naval invasion was to be prepared and executed on, if that would be the case. But I thank you for the question nonetheless. It's a pretty good one. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from Christopher Ryan. He says, "Hey man, I love the channel, and I'm going to skip on reading the rest of it just because I don't want to rehash a topic that we went over yesterday. But Christopher, we have taken that under consideration, and we will consider that into the future. But thank you for your donation." Next up is a comment from Ann Towner. They say, "Thinking of Putin's ego, would he not agree to end the war?"
I believe if we're talking about his ego, he's going to try and win the thing, because a defeat would be terrible for him, considering that he's never lost a war. So if we're putting Putin's ego into consideration, then I believe that he would never surrender. But if we're taking that out of the equation and actually looking at this logically, I believe that there would be a peace agreement that is reached. And when I said surrender, I really meant peace agreement. So sorry about that mix up of words, but I thank you very much for the support nonetheless. And that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and MMC just snuck in a $20 donation. Thank you for the support. They say, "Do shore-based cruise missile for Ukraine exist? If not, couldn't the USA load a few on the next C5 Galaxy?"
They actually do have a few, and I believe that they will probably use them in the future if a landing force does try and conduct a landing operation around Odessa. So just for the reasons of time, I'm not going to go too far into that because we are way over time at this point. So I'm sorry about that. But thank you for the donation nonetheless. And that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
Okay, and the next question is from Parker. He says, "Do you think Putin and Zelensky will meet within the next 2 to 3 months?"
Oh man, I don't even really know about that, because they're so the war is such a thing right now, so tense and so emotional for Zelensky especially, and Putin. I don't think they would ever get in the same room together, because Putin is a very untrustworthy person, and on top of that, he doesn't trust other people. So I don't really think that would be a possibility in the near future. But then again, that's just my opinion. And thank you very much for the support. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from Midget Hobbit. They say, with that being said, LOL, JK.
Thank you very much for the support. And as everyone loves to hear, with that being said, on to the next question.
And with that being said, Mamba Mentality says, "Hello, new here. And question, how do you read this map?"
You read the map as follows. The red lines are the Russian front lines. The maroon one is a Russian breakthrough area, so we really don't know if there are units there. The purple lines are showing possible Russian advances down the major roadways in the cities. The blue area was a naval invasion area, we assume. The black area is outlining the areas of Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea that were kind of controlled by Russia before the war began. And then the markers on the map are color-coded to the days. So I hope that helps you out a lot. Thank you very much for the support once again, and the question. Sometimes the map isn't really cleared up well enough, but nonetheless, thank you very much. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And our final super chat of the night before we move on to some unpaid questions is from Buster Crash. He says, "Thank you for the excellent coverage and commentary."
Well, thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you find the news worthy of praise and support as well, because this is the only way we actually run the channel, is through support directly from our viewers. And so, that being said, thank you very much once again, and now we're going to answer, due to time constraints, I won't be doing the usual 3, we're only going to answer 2, and then we're going to call it a night on the stream.
Okay, so I'm just looking through here to make sure that I'm picking the best of the best. Let's see here. Richard says, "I am scared of the hypersonic missiles. If Russia were to shoot one at America, do we have the capability to shoot it down in time?"
I don't really think there's a defense to the hypersonic missiles right now, and that's what makes them very concerning. So to answer that question, I don't actually think we would have a defense against it. But then at the same time, you would have to think, even going Mach 5, you can pick that thing up. And while it may hit the target in the United States and there's nothing to do against it, the United States would, of course, be responding by that time. So I thank you very much for the question. That's kind of my answer on it. There's really not a lot known about the hypersonic missile publicly, but we do have an idea of its speed and its evasive capabilities enough to know that we do not have a defense for it at the moment. So I thank you very much for the question. It's a pretty good one. I think we may need to delve into the capabilities of the hypersonic missiles a little bit more. At least I do need to, because I need to actually figure out how much of a risk that thing is. And so that being said, we're going to move on to the final question of the night.
Okay, and the final question of the night is a question that many of you in the chat have been asking, and we're going to see about getting an answer to it. So the question is it true that Russia is using deepfake videos to fake Ukrainian officials telling the Ukrainian civilians to surrender?
I have never heard about that until now, so I'm not really sure if that's true or not. That may be just something that someone said to try and rile up some kind of fear or propaganda. Maybe that's something that is happening, but we don't have any proof of it. So to that regard, I'm not entirely sure that that is the case. And I'm going to have to plead ignorance on that because I haven't heard about that until now. But nonetheless, I thank everyone very much for their questions. They've all been incredibly good. Some of them so good I don't even really know how to answer them. So that being said, this is the conclusion of the stream tonight. The stream will come on tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, once again, covering the previous 24 hours of the war. Then it'll be day 27 by that time. If you enjoyed tonight's stream and have been watching it all the way through, make sure to like the video and also subscribe. So it really helps out our channel a lot for you to like the video. It gets it further on up in the algorithms, and so it allows more people to see it, which is kind of like the whole goal of our news, is if it's good, we want it to be seen by as many people as possible. I also like to thank everyone once again for their $30,500 worth of donations last night to Doctors Without Borders. I find it a very good thing that we did that as a community, and I thank you all once again. But that being said, which is, of course, the famous phrase at this point, I thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a great night. Thank you once again.